The African sorcerer paused, shrouded in shadows, holding what resembled a painting brush. He began to paint the face of the white man standing before him. No. He wasn't standing. His feet barely touched the ground. He was suspended by a wooden stake that pierced his body from below the abdomen and exited from the back of his neck, leaving him hanging like a slaughtered animal. But that wasn't all. He was alive. Today I will tell you the story of The Thing in the Depths, a tale I discovered in the journals of Captain Derek Williams. No one will ever know the truth about what happened on the ship Bright Night, nor will anyone know what occurred at all except through these pages. So I ask you all to focus and pay attention. My name is Derek Williams, and I am not here to write my memoirs, but to recount to you what happened, what is happening, and part of what will happen. I am not here to talk about myself, so don't expect foolishness reminiscent of silly events or tales of feeling lonely, throwing myself to the sharks. The important part is that we are now 10 miles away from the shores of Africa. We completed our mission successfully, but we paid a heavy price, losing 5 men. And the worst part is that their bodies were no longer suitable for transport or burial. For those who are unaware, let me explain a bit more. 2 weeks ago, Lord John McCarthy hired me and my crew for a truly strange mission. He gave me an old tattered map with a skull mark on it and told me that at this mark lives an African sorcerer, and we must bring him back for him. Under normal circumstances, I would have responded appropriately to someone wanting me to search for an African sorcerer. But Lord McCarthy offered me a sum of gold coins sufficient for me to roam the earth. So I gathered my crew, briefly explained the mission, and silenced their ridicule by showing them a bag of gold coins, telling them we would receive the same upon successful completion of the mission. Thus they became convinced that their fate was to find this African sorcerer. This is how preparations for long voyages begin: fixing the decrepit ship, stocking food and drink free of alcohol, bidding farewell to family and friends, and finally, the last night party on land, where we drink enough wine to ignite Rome. In the end, my massive ship Bright Night set sail, a wooden vessel capable of miraculously staying afloat on water, and days passed with the scent of salt and the taste of fish and cured meat. Would you like a shorter summary? Fine. We reached the African shores after a grueling journey in which we faced a storm that almost sank us and ended our sins. But we survived to begin the search through the African jungles for this mad sorcerer. Here, I must provide you with some details as they are crucial for understanding what happened, and thus, what is happening. As we began our search, the night descended with its gloomy shadows upon that jungle, where the trees and leaves intertwined, turning it into a black hell teeming with mud and beasts and insects. The torches in our hands illuminated only our holders, yet we were armed with rifles and daggers, and the memory of the bag of gold coins filled our hearts with determination and courage. The skull mark on the tattered map was so precise that I had never seen anything like it in my life, and I, having seen hundreds of maps, considered it a sign of good fortune, especially as after several hours of walking, we saw something coming in from behind the trees. We thought this might mean our mission was nearing its end, so we extinguished our torches and moved closer. But as we approached the source of the light, we were struck with terror upon witnessing the horrifying scene. Let me describe the scene for you, and then I will attempt to sketch it at the bottom of the page to help you visualize it better. A circular stone clearing, illuminated by bright red flames emerging directly from the ground without any wood burning or anything combustible. Nearby stood that African sorcerer, shrouded in shadows, holding an object resembling a painting brush, painting the face of that white man in front of him. No, he wasn't standing. His feet were not touching the ground. He was suspended by a wooden stake piercing through his body from below the abdomen, exiting from the back of his neck, leaving him hanging like a slaughtered animal. But that wasn't all. He was alive. The white man was in this state and alive, while the African sorcerer painted his face with a strange red paint, quietly whispering to him, while the white man responded in the same hushed tones, as if they were old friends discussing something. Yeah, and the white man had only one leg. The other was several meters away, having been removed in a manner that suggested it wasn't surgical at all. Yes, that was precisely what I witnessed. In an African jungle in the dark, under a downpour that must have drowned our ship, we were witnessing this dreadful scene, exchanging glances of equal inquiry. How could we capture this man and return him to our homeland? Here I must emphasize an important point. I acted according to the dictates of common sense and decided to sacrifice the gold. I signaled the men that we would return to our ship without it, and for the first time since I had worked with this crew, I faced no objections. We only desired to leave this place quickly. Yet this wasn't part of what happened. What happened was that Stephen, one of my crew members, slipped his foot on a slick rock and fell on his face, clinging to his rifle, causing a lone gunshot to echo like a great explosion in that jungle. And then everything happened so quickly after that. In an instant, the strange flames in the stone clearing vanished. Darkness engulfed the place. And then Stephen's scream rang out. Let me tell you, you don't know Stephen, so you can't comprehend what it means for Stephen to scream. He had previously suffered burns on his back and narrowly escaped losing his arm to an angry shark, yet he didn't scream either time, as if he understood that screaming did not suit his big body. But this time he screamed like a French woman surprised by German soldiers storming her quarters, heavily armed. His scream made us scream as well when we heard it. When I regained my composure, I commanded them, "Retreat to the ship. Protect yourselves with the rifles. Be careful not to shoot each other." When I finished, I felt something passing by me with incredible speed, and I swear I saw eyes glowing in the dark, but I am not sure. All of a sudden, Peter screamed. With Peter's scream, we felt something else splatter on our faces besides the falling rain. Something warm and viscous with a bitter, salty taste. Something coursing through our veins, and we called it blood. Then the festival began. Gunshots mixed with the storm, screams, and the growls of jungle beasts as blood sprayed like the sky was raining it down. In the end, a gunshot rang out, hitting the intended target. And this time we heard no screams. Only the massive body of the sorcerer fell to the ground, and we gathered around him, emptying our rifles into his body, unable to see from the overwhelming darkness before finally stopping, letting our breathlessness dominate the whole situation. John was the first to speak. We lost 5 men, but he fell at last. But we lost 5 men, damn it. This wasn't part of the agreement. Here I admit I said to him, "The gold will be divided among fewer." And here I confess that this calmed them a little. One of them said, "Let's leave then." But I said, "It is only a few hours until dawn. Let's wait. I will not move in this darkness again." I faced no objections. We sat on the ground near the body of the African sorcerer, feeling my body tremble considerably, thanking the heavens for the darkness that concealed this from the men. Suddenly, one of the men asked the expected question, "What exactly happened?" I thought for a long time, then answered him, "By the light of dawn, we will know, and we will understand." Then dawn came after a long wait, and a night in which none of us could sleep for even a moment. And in that faint light we began to see what surrounded us, and for the first time I saw the body of the African sorcerer clearly. And I saw, although I swear we had emptied our rifles into him, he was unharmed, not a scratch on his body. The African sorcerer was not a lifeless corpse as he should have been. He was lying on the ground, relaxed, looking at me, and smiling. We shackled him in chains and transported him to the ship. That was my decision, and it was not exaggerated. When 5 men empty their rifles into the chest of an African sorcerer and then in the morning find him unharmed, like a snake, smiling mockingly, The wise decision is to bind him well in chains before transporting him anywhere. Of course, the men initially demanded we leave him behind and save our skins, but I reminded them of the gold and the blood of our companions that would go to waste, so they revoked their decision, a scent of discontent wafting from them. I do not deny I trembled in horror at the thought of transporting this thing with us on our ship and spending our days with it in the heart of the ocean. But I kept reminding myself of the iron cage I had recently added to my ship, to imprison anyone who defies my orders. And it was a seemingly harsh method but very effective with the herd of ruffians I was leading. Yes, that cage would host our cursed sorcerer until we were rid of him. And should he do anything during the voyage, I would bury the rest of my ammunition in his body and toss him to the sharks. But I admitted, deep down was still trembling in fear. There was a state of sorrow and tension aboard the ship as we began our return trip. In reality, I missed those who had perished in the jungle. The ship's crew was really a herd of ruffians. But I hadn't known any other ruffians in the last 30 years of my life, and what my mind retains of memories pertains in one way or another to our nights aboard this ship. And now they lay in the ship's hold, lifeless in their last journey across the ocean, leaving us their rations of food and drink. Yes. As a captain of a ship led by ruffians, I must think this way. Tonight, those who survived would receive double their usual rations of food and drink, and this would be sufficient to calm them until the next day. And by then, I would find something else to boost their morale. In any case, these memoirs are not to discuss my personal musings. They are to recount what happened, gentlemen, and we still have much to tell. The truth is that everything that occurred up until this point was something akin to the breeze that precedes the storm. The two storms, to be precise. The captain who does not sense the storm before it occurs does not deserve to be captain. For 30 years, I have heard stories of those who perished at sea merely because they did not know a storm was coming to avoid it or prepare for it in any way they could. However, despite this, I was seized with terror when I felt this particular storm coming. It was not just a storm. It was the spiritual mother of all sea storms that have ever swept the seas since the dawn of time. The storm that begins and gathers strength as rapidly as you read these lines. The storm in which lightning mingles with thunder, that raises waves to heights previously not reached by mountains, where the buzzing of the winds is louder than your screams. A storm like this truly deserves respect. A storm like this you must avoid or perish. This is where experience comes into play, and I have no knowledge of this ocean beyond my experience. I gathered the remaining men and gave them dozens of orders, confident that if they executed half of them, there would be hope we wouldn't be swallowed by the ocean. Then, I headed over to reassure our African guest, who I felt sure was responsible for the storm in some way, would remain in place until we reached our homeland and obtained the gold. I had placed him in his small iron cage in the dirtiest place possible in the hold, hoping that the sea's illnesses would afflict him as a mild punishment. But when I reached that dark, damp corner, I found him reclining inside the cage in an odd state of relaxation, maintaining his terrifying smile. He was eating. With his free hand, he held the body of a huge gray monkey, more than 2/3 of its head gone, leaving some blood around the mouth of the African sorcerer. Before anyone wonders, this scoundrel wore nothing but an apron made from the bark of trees to cover his shame. And besides that, his ebony body gleamed in the light of the kerosene lamp I held, signaling that there was nowhere to hide this monkey when we brought him aboard. And I swear by my mother's grave that he hadn't held anything in his hand since we chained him until we brought him here. And of course I knew that no monkey could have entered my ship unless one of my ruffians hid a monkey on our ship without my knowledge. Thus I turned to leave for the deck when the terrible lewd voice rose for the first time, speaking in flawless English. "Derek, do you remember where you hid the body of McNeil? In my entire life I had only gambled once, and during that time I almost lost the most important thing I ever owned, my dignity. I had drunk far more than my usual amount, which fueled courage in my veins and stupidity in my head, leading me to challenge James McNeil himself. And for those among you who don't know McNeil, let me summarize his life in a line or two. He was a gunsmith who struck a foolish deal with a gang. They killed his wife and only child, leaving him mad, gambling day and night, becoming unbeatable in it even if challenged by the finest and most cunning men. Thus, it took me no more than half an hour to lose everything I had to him. I still owed him several £1,000s to settle what I lost. The men in the pub surrounded our table, eagerly watching what was happening when McNeil offered me an unforgettable deal. He took off his old dirty shoe for the first time since his family perished, placed it on the table before me, offering me the choice to either kiss it or surrender my ship to him. The men around us grew excited, cheering gleefully. Then some of the more reckless suggested that I kiss it and leave with my ship. But I couldn't even stand the thought. So I announced before the crowd that my ship now rightfully belonged to him and left in a rush, biting my tongue in agony. In my life, no one had dared to direct such an insult at me. Then came that. That's why no one will blame me for saying that I waited for him all night near the tavern, then ambushed him in one of the deserted roads to knock him unconscious. He regained consciousness only with the muzzle of my rifle smashed in his mouth, shattering his teeth, finding himself in the last place he could ever think someone would search for him, at the grave of his daughter. Now he stands on the tiny skeleton surrounding a tattered white dress, and that is all that is left of his daughter. Why did I commit such an atrocity? Youth, alcohol, stupidity. It doesn't matter the reason, for whatever regrets I would feel afterward will not bring him back. In an instant, McNeil realized where he was, and contrary to all my expectations, he displayed a sense of calmness, and I had no time to waste with him. I shot him with a round from my rifle. His head, severed from his body, fell onto his daughter's corpse. Then his body tumbled into the tomb to bury him eternally, allowing me to take my ship and escape this city forever, ensuring no one would ever know what happened. They would never find his body. This secret would never be revealed, and would accompany me to my grave. I never thought the day would come when I would bring an African sorcerer from a jungle in a continent thousands of miles from my homeland, only to discover that in the end, he knows my only secret. And now the heat of the oil lamp begins to burn my fingers without power to move, while the African sorcerer before me in his cage continues with his terrifying mocking voice. "Derek, have you forgotten McNeil? The barrel of your gun still bears his blood. Have you forgotten him?" Here I barely manage a word. "How could you? How did you know?" He told me, "Don't bother with these trivialities. Just think about how your men will feel if they find out. Do you want my opinion? I think they'll be very angry, Derek. They will be extremely angry." And I thought to myself, I'll be lucky if they don't just skin me and toss me to the sharks. But why? He said I can stop this information leak right now, and don't think for a moment. More days in your life are those who attempted to kill me, and they ended up in my gut. Maybe it would be best for you to help me. I help you. Why not? I can't move, as you can see, and this monkey won't satiate my hunger for long. My racing mind began focusing. You want food? I could... He interrupted. Your food I will not touch. I desire better food. My racing mind grasped the truth but couldn't believe it, while the mocking voice continued. I suspect 2 of the ruffians who man the ship will suffice for me until we arrive. You can justify their disappearance as due to the storm. I said, You're the one who caused the storm. He replied, I'm just trying to help you, Derek. Hurry, for your ship won't withstand the storm for long. Hurry, or your men will be listening to a nice story about their captain due to a few extra cups of drink. I decided I would try to rid myself of this thing. At least take the risk, but that thing tossed something at my feet, causing me to jump back in fright, to see on the floor of the wooden hold all the bullets we shot him with, which had pierced his chest. Then he said, I'll start with your short-legged, blonde-haired, limping one. I say unconsciously. Mike Sinclair. He said, "That's not his real name, but I'll start with him. And don't worry, I won't leave his bones behind, so you never have to bury them in some relative's grave." He said it, then laughed a terrifying laugh. As for me, I began to think of how I would bring Mike into this room without the others suspecting, and the horror that would follow. Quickly, I will introduce you to the remaining alive crew on my ship of ruffians. John Schofield, the irritable one who never stops swearing. Shin McLeod, the Knife King, as we like to call him. Dorian the Filthy, the only one among us who doesn't bathe as long as we're on the water, as he believes that brings bad luck, while I insist that it only brings us his unbearable stench. Stephen Hughes, the old man. He knows more about the seas than you sharks know. And finally, Mike Sinclair, the first victim on the African sorcerers list. Let me remind you of the situation. We are now only a few minutes away from the fiercest storm I have ever seen in my life, and in the hold of my ship is a dreadful African sorcerer who wants one of my men, Sinclair, as his next meal. Or he will reveal my secret of James McNeil, whom I killed and buried in his daughter's grave. Anyone among you who knows the details fully understands I have no other choice but to obey this thing that waits for me to fall one by one, until we all pay the price for this vile task. I will sacrifice one of my men at a time I need them most, let alone the dead. Yes, I can easily lure Sinclair into the hold, but how will I justify his disappearance later? So I gifted you the storm. Men drown in storms, if you remember, he says, while I recall that I'm still standing in front of him thinking. He says, "Hurry up." I genuinely miss the taste of white men. He says it, then follows it with a smile that revealed teeth I have never seen even in a shark's mouth. And in his eyes gleamed a bizarre joy. As for me, despite the terror expanding in my veins and spreading through every muscle in my body, with a stench wafting from my exhalations, I shake my head in surrender. Then I go to fetch Sinclair. In a tone that holds mockery, Sinclair tells me, "No, I won't go down to the hold as long as that thing is there. Send Shin or Dorian instead." But I answered with a tone that left no room for argument. "I am captain on this ship, and I decide who does what. So go down to the hold and make sure that our guest is tightly secured. I don't want him on deck if the storm worsens." He hesitated and said, "But..." I shouted in exasperation, having lost my temper. "Go, Sinclair, or I will lock you in the same cage with him. I swear I will." Here Sinclair had no choice but to curse me silently and head down to the hold while I stood on deck, watching him with my gaze. And whether intentional or not, at the moment he vanished, a huge lightning bolt illuminated the sky above to the ocean. Then, as the thunder crashed down, the rain suddenly poured over us mercilessly. Now I realize that I need a miracle to survive this storm with only 4 men. Now I understand the depth of the hole I fell into and feel the same feeling I felt when McNeil's head fell into his daughter's grave, standing on its threshold while the smoke rose from my rifle. Now my lips involuntarily whisper, "Farewell, Sinclair. This storm will hurl us into the heart of hell, you captain. We will not survive this filth, even if the spirits of the seas join hands to offer us their tainted help." That was Dorian the Filthy, whose tongue's cleanliness matches the cleanliness of his body. So I replied, "We will do our best to avoid the storm. If we surrender, we will drown for sure. I know, but we're few. Where did that bastard Sinclair go?" His question piqued everyone's curiosity on deck, so Shin repeated, "Yeah. Where did Sinclair disappear?" I struggled to appear composed to the men and said, "He's in the hold, ensuring our guest remains in place until we arrive. I'll go down to fetch him." But I cried out in horror, "No, I will go down. You execute the orders I gave." And without granting them a chance to argue, I turned and headed toward the hold. This night will not end well, I am confident of this. All I need is to survive the storm, and then I can lead the ship alone to the shore if it comes to that. I am now at the stage where one loses their mind slowly, but with confidence. The men above are waiting for me to return with Sinclair while I, and you, know this is now impossible. The storm worsens, clenching us with an unforgiving grasp, and worst of all, the burning feeling of guilt igniting within. I am the one who led the men to a journey from which none will return. Moreover, I lead them to the gallows without them even knowing. Look what I have done to you. The terrible mocking voice booms in the hold. I flinched and cast a quick glance at the scene before me, emptying my stomach immediately, the least reaction to what I saw. Blood covers everything. Blood on the walls, on the floor, on the ceiling. Still warm and viscous, dripping like disgusting drops. Blood in the air, on the lips of the African sorcerer and his body, on his teeth and hair on the bars of the cage. Sinclair's blood stains my sins. He said, I apologize for the mess, but he fought too hard. You know how delightful resistance is. We had fun, but I made you this gift. Then, with his outstretched arm outside the cage, he threw me a necklace made of hair, teeth, and flesh. All that remained of Sinclair. This is my gift to you. With the regards of Arthur. The name took me by surprise, and I asked, Who? Arthur? How did you think he was Sinclair? Did I not tell you he wasn't his real name? He too was hiding from his past. A vile secret he ran from his entire life. But his escape ended here. Then I couldn't help but ask, How? How do you know all this? The thing in its cage laughed a malicious laugh and answered, I know everything. I know while I wait. I know. And you come to me yourself. Yes, we came to him, and he awaited us. The one we thought was our prey became our hunter, intending to devour us one by one. Then he said, And now I want Dorian. The filthy Dorian, as you call him. I said, Impossible. The men are asking about Sinclair, the storm. How will I survive with just 3 men? Impossible. He said, I am the one who started this storm, and I can end it. As for you, you have nothing but to execute what I command. I tried to resist, but the men are searching for Sinclair, and if he remains absent longer. But he interrupted me with a mocking, playful tone. You wanted Sinclair. Good. I'll send you Sinclair. In the pouring rain and the illuminating lightning, the men on deck recounted to me what they saw, trembling with fear. Damn it. The filthy one jumped into the ocean. Sinclair the damned leaped towards us, face blank, without hesitation, plunging into the ocean. Believing Dorian's words, said, Shin. The waves swallowed him in a second. We scarcely had a chance to save him. But I knew the truth. I knew where Sinclair ended up. But I said, we have no time left then. With him or not, we must survive the storm. Otherwise, the waves will swallow us as well. But the men exchanged glances quickly. Then old Stephen, with his feeble voice, said, Captain, we made our decision. We don't want this African on our ship. What do you mean? We will throw him into the ocean. That's our decision, and we won't change it. I shouted in anger, and I will stop you. This African will remain with us until we reach shore and take our gold. Once more, the men exchanged glances. Then Dorian the Filthy said, We expected this from you. So we will put you in the sorcerer's cage after we dispose of him. Forgive us, Captain, but it's our decision. He said it, and thunder rumbled to silence any response I might have ventured. Any response. But he was not there. When the men carried me chained to the hold, they found the iron cage open, and they found blood still covering everything, still falling in drops from the ceiling, but our African sorcerer was no longer there. Against my will, I found myself bursting into hysterical laughter as the men exchanged bewildered glances, while Shin repeated, Where did this thing go? He questions as I laugh, and laugh and laugh. He knows. He knows everything and waits. And amid my hysterical laughter, The men had no choice but to throw me into the cage and lock me inside, announcing, "Dorian, we will search the ship for this thing." While drops of blood dripped onto my head from the ceiling, merging with my laughter, they left me to search for the thing. And the hunt began. Their hunt. How long have I been in the hold? I do not recall. I only remember how it all ended. How Shin eventually entered the room, blood covering him, with his arm missing, and his face drained of color and blood pouring from his mouth as he said, saying his last words, "Everyone is finished." I had awoken from my stupor to begin my fear, shouting in confusion, "What happened?" He said, "There is no time left. You must end it. You must finish it before everything concludes." Then he opened the cage, letting it crash to the ground, and I hurried to him, letting blood scatter over my face from his mouth one last time. This thing must not reach the shore. It must not. Before his life could suffice to finish his sentence. He merely relaxed his body forever to escape the horror. It must not reach the shore. Now I finally comprehend what I must do for the first time, and now I strive to execute it. But I decided I would write down what happened first. I told you I hate writing memoirs, but this tale is the only thing that must survive. So here I am recounting to you what happened, and what is still happening on pages made of skin and ink resilient against water. Now, I stand in the dark hold, waiting for the coming of the thing. There is none left but me, while the ship shudders and quakes in the heart of the storm. The storm he commenced, and I will conclude. Now I will predict what will happen, and I will place these papers in a sturdy metal box that will withstand whatever happens. For I don't think I will have much time left. The thing will come to the hold with its tall frame and the color of night, its mocking laughter and terrifying voice, and it will tell me it's your turn. Then I will respond, "I am ready. Now you will make me reach the shore." There, I will enjoy myself immensely, on solid ground. But I will let it approach me with its confident steps, while my rifle remains behind my back. I know what you are thinking and what you have planned. It will say this. It knows everything. But I will let it continue its advance until it draws near enough. Then I will say, "Know that you will never reach the shore." And swiftly I will fire from my rifle at the barrels of gunpowder stored in the hold, and in the fierce storm, the sound of the explosion will mingle with the rumble of thunder, with the scream of the thing, and the heavens will remember the color that my ship exploded. Yes, this will happen almost exactly, or precisely, but this is the end of my memoirs. My name is Muhammad, and I am 18 years old. I am in love with stories about jinn and the myths that surround them. My library was filled with books that talk about them, and it's impossible for a day to pass by without reading at least one story about them. One day I read a book that discussed the traits and names of jinn, and it was called The World of Jinn. However, at the end of the book, there was a note that read, "Now, dear reader, if you want to learn more about our world, all you have to do is read this phrase." The phrase was strange, written in what seemed like cryptic symbols. I was puzzled at first. Should I read that strange phrase or not? Finally, I decided to read it because I wanted to know more about their world and satisfy my curiosity. The moment I finished reading the phrase, the electricity in the house went out suddenly. At first, I was terrified, but then I told myself, what am I afraid of? It's just a short circuit. I grabbed my phone and started calling out to everyone in the house, but no one answered. Could they all be sleeping? No, that's impossible. It's only 8 in the evening. While I was lost in thought, the power returned. I wanted to check on everyone, so I ran to their rooms, but I found no one in the house. Could they have all left without telling me? No, that's impossible, but where are they? Where did everyone go? I rushed to the window to see if they were in the garden, and that's when the horror hit me. I couldn't move an inch, and my eyes didn't blink. Is what I'm seeing real? But why is blood pouring from them? Who killed them? Who killed my family? They were all sitting on chairs around the table in the garden, but they were headless corpses. Their heads were cut off and placed on the table in front of them. Will they kill me too? Am I going to die this way? No, I don't want to die. I'm still young. I ran to my room and locked the door, and in my sheer fear, I couldn't even cry for the family I just lost. I took out my phone to call the police and report what happened when suddenly I heard a terrifying voice behind me say, "You caused your family's death. This is the price you paid for delving into our world. Welcome." I froze in place, my limbs went cold, and the hair on my body stood up. I stood still for about 10 minutes before I turned around, but I found no one. I felt a bit relieved. I called the police to inform them of my family's murder. Less than 10 minutes later, the police arrived at my house, shocked by the scene they saw in the garden. Despite my terrible mental state, I was taken to the station for questioning. After I called the police, I hid all the books related to Jinn in the basement of the house, inside one of the old boxes so that the police wouldn't find them. The officer started questioning me, asking where I was at the time of the crime. I told him I was studying for exams in my room since it was the final exam period. Despite my attempts to clear myself, they didn't believe any of my stories. How could my whole family die without me noticing? And why was I the only one left alive? The suspicions were on me, but since they had no evidence to link me to the crime, they had to release me. And that was the start of my journey into the world of Jinn. The next day, my uncle, Abdullah, held a funeral for my family, but only a few people came to offer their condolences. This was understandable due to the rumors spreading that my house was haunted and that Jinn had killed my family. To ease my burden, my uncle offered for me to live with him. But of course, I refused. I didn't want to endanger him and his family because of me. My uncle didn't pressure me or insist on his opinion so as not to add to my sorrows, handling my expenses and my schooling instead. 3 swift days passed, the funeral was over, and life returned to the house. The only one living with me was that young servant my uncle had brought in. At midnight, I decided to go to bed as I was feeling sleepy. I truly wanted to sleep after 3 days of not finding rest. How could I sleep knowing that I was the cause of my family's death? I finally surrendered to sleep, closed my eyes, and hardly a few seconds passed before I heard a whisper close to my ear. "Why are you sad? Didn't you wish for your family to disappear so you could connect with us better? We have made your wish come true." At first, I was very scared, and I couldn't move because of the fear, but after the voice faded away, all my fear left me, and a wide smile, a smile of joy and cunning, formed on my face. Yes, from the beginning I wished for my family to vanish, and now my dream has come true. Why be sad? Sleep vanished from my eyes, and I opened my computer to look for the second part of the book to order it online because it was impossible for it to be found in libraries. After searching for more than an hour, I finally found it. I was very excited to read the book. All I could think about was what information it would contain this time. Would it provide more details about Jinn and their world, or would it contain a way to communicate with the other world? 5 days later, the book arrived at my house. I took it and rushed to the basement because it was the best place to hide the books in case the police suddenly showed up at the house, since the case was still unresolved. I opened the book and skimmed through it quickly, and that's when the surprise hit me. This book was completely different from the first issue. Its words were incomprehensible even though they were written in Arabic, and there were also strange symbols drawn on its pages. I went back to the book's introduction to read it and saw that it contained, "This edition is very limited. In fact, this is the only printed copy of this book, made specifically for the person who deserves it. Yes, it is you, the one reading this book now." You will notice that this book differs fundamentally from the previous edition, so do not worry. The strange words and symbols present here are to teach you how to communicate with Jinn and enter their world. In short, this book will teach you magic. I didn't finish reading the introduction because it was somewhat boring and long, but the important thing is that I understood the content of the book well. While I was reading and browsing through the book, A strange symbol caught my eye. It was a large star surrounded by 2 circles, and in the middle of the star was a drawn crescent moon. Although the symbol seemed normal, it fascinated me a lot. I didn't know why exactly. I brought some chalk and began to draw the circle on the basement floor, gathered all the necessary tools outlined in the book. And when I wanted to start the rituals, I heard the servant approaching, so I quickly hid my items, erased the drawing, and went to see what he wanted. When I asked him what he needed, he answered, "Dinner is ready." I looked at him with disdainful glances, which made me cancel all my rituals and erase the drawing for dinner. Then I smiled cunningly and returned to the basement, feeling that the servant was nearly terrified of me and my looks. I laughed maniacally at him and decided to start the rituals the next day. As usual, the following day I went to school, and it was the last day of classes. When the school day ended, I hurried home, not even taking off my school clothes. I descended into the basement, locked myself in, and then headed to the old iron box where I had stored my jinn books. I opened the book and ignored the star symbol, deciding to start from the beginning of the book. I discovered a detailed explanation of how to connect with the jinn world and talk to them, which was amazing as I had longed to speak with them instead of just reading about them. I indeed prepared the rituals and began to read those strange incantations. As I read, I noticed that the light was flickering on and off, and the items on the floor were moving as if an earthquake was shifting them, although the ground did not shake. As soon as I finished reciting the incantations, the lamp shattered. I started hearing strange sounds, a sound of children's laughter, crying, and the thing that terrified me the most was the sound of a woman screaming. I almost died of fear, but I managed to hold myself together. I felt something approaching me. How could there be someone in the basement when I was sure no one was home except the servant, who I saw cleaning the garden when I entered the house? I felt its steps getting closer. I was very scared and couldn't move from the fear. What's going to happen to me? Would they kill me like they killed my family? I want to escape. I want to get out of the basement. But my body wouldn't respond. It came very close. I started to hear its breathing. It put its head on my shoulder. I didn't have the courage to turn around and look at it, but I felt that its hair was long. Is it a woman? She whispered softly in my ear. As I told you before, welcome to our world. Don't be afraid of us. Complete the rituals in the book if you want to live. Don't be afraid. How can you ask me not to be afraid while your mere presence scares me? To give you some information about myself, I am easily frightened but also very curious. I was aware that there was a high possibility of this happening, but I couldn't curb my curiosity. I was extremely scared of that woman and the words she said. Would I die if I didn't complete all the rituals in the book? Am I crazy? I know that what I'm doing will lead me to hell, but what can I do? I can't restrain myself. In the end, I decided that I would complete all the rituals in the book, but this time I would make the servant come with me to the basement. But he would tell my uncle, even without me informing him about what is going on. He would eventually find out. It's only a matter of time. I have to get rid of him quickly before he uncovers my secret and exposes me. Yes, I must get rid of him. When evening came, I took all my books and threw them in the trash except for that book, which I kept in my room. Then I immediately returned to the basement to ensure that I had disposed of all the books related to the jinn. I opened the box, and to my shock, all the books I had thrown away were in the box again. How did they come back? I was certain that I had thrown them away just a moment ago. Who returned them? Who knows my secret? Is it the servant? No, that's impossible. If he knew, he would have told my uncle. How could he return them so quickly? So who could it be? Could it be them? Is this a warning from them? But wait, wasn't I the one who wanted to contact them and talk to them? Why am I scared now? Okay, I'll finish the book and see what happens, even though I'm not optimistic that it will end badly. Suddenly, while I was thinking and talking to myself, that girl appeared again, but this time she was standing far away in the corner. I couldn't see her features well because her thick hair covered her face, and her strange stance was enough to instill fear in my heart. She said to me in a terrifying tone, "Surely the outcome will not be bad. All you have to do is complete the rituals." Then she laughed menacingly and loudly and vanished again. I rushed out to return to my room only to hear screams coming from the house. It was the voice of the servant. I ran quickly to him and found the kitchen on fire. We both ran outside, relieved that I had my phone with me, and I immediately called the fire department. It didn't take long for them to arrive with the police and an ambulance. The police tried to find out the reason for the fire. The servant answered them, "I don't know. I was heading to the kitchen to grab a snack, and as soon as I stepped inside, the kitchen caught fire. It just ignited suddenly. I don't know why." After 2 hours, the matter was resolved, and we returned home. Thankfully, the fire was small. The servant didn't know the cause of the fire, but I was sure that I was the reason. I believed it was also a warning for me. I went to my room, feeling anxious, frightened about what the future held for me. I laid my head on the bed and fell asleep immediately because I was exhausted. But it hardly took minutes before I woke up to the bed shaking. It shook violently, and I could hear those strange sounds, the laughter of children and the screams of a woman from nowhere. However, after 2 minutes, everything disappeared, and the room returned to normal as if nothing had happened. I laid my head down once more to sleep, and this time nothing happened. I woke up early the next morning and immediately went back to the basement, carrying the book in my hands. It was 6:30 in the morning. I opened the book to proceed with the second ritual, but I was shocked by the requirement. It said that I had to not shower for 2 weeks, not shave, not cut my nails, and most importantly, I had to not meet any person during that time. I returned home and took a shower, shaved my beard and hair, and cut my nails. I did all these things because I wouldn't be able to do them for 2 weeks. Then I went to the servant and asked him not to communicate with me for 2 weeks and not to bring me food or anything. At first he was surprised by my request, but then he accepted it. I prepared all my supplies, packed some canned goods and water in my room, and locked myself in. Thankfully, my room had a bathroom, so it was the perfect place to keep myself confined. 2 weeks passed, during which I suffered greatly. I couldn't communicate with anyone or leave my room, plus the strange noises and events happening around me. Those 2 weeks were hell for me, but thank God I made it through them safely. I opened the cursed book again and was shocked by the new requirements. It said I must not shower ever or cut my hair. What? Are they joking? I'm not that dirty. Enough that I endured this for 2 weeks. I couldn't handle it any longer, so I went to the bathroom to shower and ignored all the warnings I had seen before. The moment I took off my shirt, I heard loud, strange noises. I stepped out of the bathroom to check on my room and saw the shock. All the furniture was shattered and the room was in disarray. I gathered my courage and went back to the bathroom. I didn't care what would happen. I had enough. I showered, shaved my hair and beard, and clipped my nails. After finishing everything, I exited the room, but what was happening? All the furniture in the house was ruined. I started running crazily through the house, then went outside to the garden, where I saw the servant sitting on the ground, trembling, looking like he might die from fear. I approached him and took his hand to calm him down a bit. The moment I held his hand, he hugged me tightly and began to cry. It was the first time I had seen him in this state since he started working for me. I started to pat him to comfort him. I cannot blame him. He is still just a young boy who hasn't reached 15. I waited until he calmed down a bit, then asked him what had happened. He replied, trembling in fear, "I don't know what happened. I swear to you I didn't break anything." After I finished cleaning, I sat in the living room to rest a bit, but suddenly, the items began to fly and fall to the ground and get destroyed. And there were also some things that I saw breaking in their place. Also, yes, I heard screaming sounds that were terrifying. I don't know where they came from. I replied with a smile while I was scared. "Don't worry. I promise you this will be the last time you see and hear these things." Hello, let me introduce myself. I am a servant who worked in the house of Mr. Mohammed. My name is Sultan, and I am 15 years old. Mr. Mohammed's house was very frightening. At the beginning, his family was killed under mysterious circumstances. The police couldn't discover the reason, and the case was closed. This is where my work in the house began at the order of his uncle, although I was hesitant and did not want to work there. Since my first day, I had been hearing strange sounds daily, but I ignored them and didn't tell my master so I wouldn't worry him. But what intrigued me the most was my master himself. He always spent all his time in the basement from the moment he woke up until he went to sleep. One day, he made a strange request. He told me that I shouldn't approach his room for 2 weeks. That was a long time, but I thought he wanted that because he was unsocial. Therefore, I accepted the matter. However, the catastrophe came after the 2 weeks passed. Suddenly, the furniture in the house began to break, and I started to hear strange and frightening sounds while I was in the living room. I immediately ran out of the house and went to the garden, sitting there. I couldn't move because of the fear and the terrifying scene I had witnessed. After a short while, my master came out of the house looking very frightened. He rushed towards me, so I jumped into his arms and started to cry. I did that instinctively, even though I was always afraid of him because of his looks. But I was surprised by what happened next. He began to pat my head, trying to calm me down and relieve my fear. I understood that he was also scared too. His breathing was rapid, and I could hear his breath, and he was trembling with fear. I kept my composure and calmed down a bit, and then he asked me about what had happened, and I told him everything. He replied with a smile, albeit still with a fearful expression. "Don't worry. I promise that this will be the last time you see and hear those things." Indeed, that was the last time. Just after my master finished his sentence, something I never expected happened. Suddenly, my master began to scream and moan as he held his hand over his heart. I tensed up and didn't know what to do. I sensed that something worse was about to happen, and indeed it did. My master dropped dead in front of me. He died before my eyes, and I couldn't do anything for him. I started crying hysterically. Even though my time with him was brief, I had grown attached to him, and now he was dead before me. Days passed, and news spread about my master's death. After autopsying him, the doctor said that the main cause of death was a heart attack. But could it really be a heart attack? Even if everyone believed this was the reason behind his death, I would never believe it after witnessing the strange things that happened before my eyes. I am sure that the truth behind it was completely different from what the doctor described, and I must discover it. After that, his uncle took me to work for him again in his house. After a few days had passed, I asked him for permission to go out, and he agreed. I rushed immediately to Mohammed's house and climbed over the wall since the door was locked. It was 8 in the evening. Once I entered the house, the first place I headed to was the basement, my master's favorite spot. The basement was very spacious, but it was also scary and dark, making me feel gloomy and melancholic. I started searching through everything there, hoping to uncover something. Something caught my attention. A strange box placed far away in the corner, covered with an old cloth. I approached it and removed the cloth. There was an ancient iron box underneath. When I attempted to open it, I found it locked. It's truly suspicious. I searched the entire basement for the key but found nothing. I left and headed to Mohammed's room. I don't know why, but I was sure I would find the key there. There's something I forgot to mention. After Mohammed's death, I mustered up my courage and decided to enter the house to retrieve the phone and inform his uncle about what had happened. But I was taken aback by what I saw. Every broken piece of furniture in the house had returned to its original state, as if I were dreaming. Here, I was convinced that the actual reason behind my master's family's deaths was not him or an unknown killer, but something far greater, much larger than him, and certainly not human. Back to my narrative, I went into Mohammed's room to look for any evidence and to search for the key. While I was searching, I found something that piqued my curiosity. It was a book filled with many pages titled The World of Jinn 2. I was astonished to find that book in the room and wondered if it had any connection to my master's death. I didn't dare to read the book, I just skimmed through its pages and was shocked by the drawings and strange symbols in it. They pointed towards methods of learning, magic and sorcery. Was he a sorcerer? While I was thinking, I noticed something shining on the table. I approached it and found a key that was large and clearly very old, covered with rust. I took the key and the book and returned to the basement. I went to the locked box and opened it, finding a large number of books inside it. However, these books weren't ordinary. They were also about jinn. I took all the books out of the box to see if there was anything else and found a set of small tools. I examined them and realized they were chalk pieces, incense, 8 candles, and a small box. That box intrigued me, so I opened it. It contained blood. I didn't know to which creature that blood belonged, but the odor was truly terrible, so I closed it right away. It was then and there that I confirmed the real cause of Muhammad's and his family's deaths. It was all because of the jinn. It appears that he had become a sorcerer, but I think he must have violated them in some way, and this was their revenge. I took the box outside and placed all the books related to jinn inside, then burned them. I was surprised when the flames turned black. However, they quickly returned to their normal color. The books turned to ashes and it was all over. I thought about telling his uncle what had happened, but I hesitated. If my master wanted everyone to know his secret, he wouldn't have hidden the books. So I decided to keep the secret to myself. Their appearance is like that of humans, but their skin resembles that of lizards, and their eyes are completely black. My name is Zane. I live in a small village far from cities and civilization. You could say, in short, we live in isolation from the modern world today. We are about to welcome a new baby. My wife is screaming in the room. Of course, there is no doctor with her. I told you. I come from a very underdeveloped village. She has a woman with her responsible for assisting women during childbirth in the village named Nadine. I feel extremely tense. You probably think it is a natural tension because I will be a father soon, but this is not the cause of my tension. I am not particularly worried about my wife. The truth is, I am anxious because tonight is a night of a full moon, and they always take the newborn that comes on this night. The sound of the baby crying causes my heart to race. Nadine comes out of the room and tells me to go in to check on my wife. When I enter the room, I find my wife crying heavily, holding our newborn. I approach her and sit beside her, trying to soothe her. She says with a voice full of tears, "They will definitely take him." I don't know what to say. I tell her that I will protect him from everything, and that they will never take him from me. But what if I fail? I am not sure I can do it. So I preferred to remain silent. I held him in my arms, looked at him, and cursed myself. What kind of father am I? I cannot protect my child from a danger I know to be inevitable. I surely do not deserve to be a father. In a desperate attempt, we agreed to stay awake all night and not allow anyone to take our baby. After midnight, we are still awake, and the little one is sleeping. I feel a severe cold in the room. The windows are tightly shut. My wife covers the sleeping child in her arms and grips my arm tightly, knowing they are here. Yes, this cold is one of the signs of their presence. I began to feel my body numb. I do not want to lose consciousness. Everything starts to fade gradually. I drown into darkness. The sound of the baby's screams. "Wake up, you sleeper." That was the voice of Sheikh Salim. I heard him repeating incomprehensible phrases, and among the phrases was one clear, "Wake up, you sleeper." I woke up in panic, finding the child not in my wife's arms. I quickly woke her up and rushed to the courtyard of the house, finding the door open and the child on the ground crying loudly. I approached him and lifted him into my arms, finding Sheikh Salim standing at the door outside, drawing boundaries around the house with white-colored dirt, repeating incomprehensible phrases, along with Nadine. It seems she brought him, for all of us here know what happens when a child is born on this night. But I was astonished by their presence outside tonight. I still remember what happened last time. Someone went out on a night like this, and we heard our neighbors' screams, but no one dared to go out. In the morning, we found him torn to pieces with some of his limbs missing and his wife crying by his side. We learned from her that he was going to the doctor to get medicine for his sick child, and she had warned him not to go out. But the poor man thought he could return quickly before they sensed him. Sheikh Salim looked at me sharply and said, "Under no circumstances leave." My wife was gripping my arm tightly and looking at the little one with pity. Sheikh Salim kept chanting those phrases until we heard a scream that shook the house. And then Sheikh Salim took a step inside the house without touching the white dirt and told me that this barrier would keep them away from the house. But we must not leave the house for 7 days. Well, 7 days. And then my son will stay with me forever. But those 7 days were not easy or simple to pass. At night, the sound of screams outside was terrifying. People called our names, and one day I heard Sheikh Salim outside. He was supposed to have gone back to his village. He is not from our village, but he comes here whenever he can to help the people of the village because he knows about these matters. By good fortune, he came on the day my dear child was born. I opened the main door and found him standing 2 meters away. He said to me, "Come out, Zain, and bring your son. Bring me an amulet. It will protect him from all dangers." "But Sheikh Salim, didn't you tell me not to go out until after 7 days?" "My son, the danger has passed. Today is the 4th since your child was born, and nothing has happened. This has never happened before. Bring him to me and don't be afraid." One of them placed their hand on my shoulder. I turned to find my wife saying, "What brought you out at this hour? Why did you open the door? Do you want to go out?" I told her no, but Sheikh Salim wanted the child to read to him an incantation. "Look, here he is." Sheikh Salim spoke. "Come here, my boy, and bring the child." My wife said, "And who told you he is Sheikh Salim?" Then she shouted, "You, if you are Sheikh Salim, come and cross the earth barrier." Sheikh Salim looked at her with hostile eyes, then let out a scream that shattered the silence and disappeared instantly. We locked the door and hurried to the room where the little one was sleeping, and the 7 days passed this way. The 7th day arrived. Neighbors and villagers gathered at our home to celebrate the new baby. I had to name him today, so I named him Naji, because he was the first to escape from them in the village. As days passed, Naji grew up, and after 5 years, my wife gave birth to our new baby girl. Her birth was on a normal day far from the full moon, so we were very happy, and it did not require the hardships we faced after Naji was born. On the 7th day of her birth, I named her Lena, and one day my wife asked me to take Naji with me to work because he was distracting her from household chores. I agreed and left Lena with her. By the way, I work as a woodcutter. I go to the forest, cut trees, and bring firewood to the village. I went with Naji to the forest and asked him to sit on a nearby rock, and as soon as I finish chopping the trees, we will go right away. I was so engrossed in my work that I completely forgot that Naji was with me. I abruptly turned around and looked at the rock where he was sitting, and I didn't find him. I started calling, "Naji, Naji," with no response. I ran through the forest like a madman searching for him. I heard his voice from afar. "Father, father." I turned and found him running toward me from a distance. I ran to him and hugged him tightly. He was drenched in sweat and appeared very frightened. I asked him, "Naji, what's wrong, my boy? Where did you go? Why didn't you tell me?" He said in a frightened voice, "Father, let's go from here, and I will tell you on the way." As we returned, he began to tell me, "When I was sitting on the rock, I saw someone hiding behind a big tree and he motioned for me to follow him. I followed him, but I lost track of him. Then he suddenly appeared behind one of the trees again, and he motioned for me to follow him. He was wearing a long cloak that completely concealed him. I followed him until we reached a stone cave, where he took off the cloak, and his appearance was very frightening. There were many people like him who pointed for me to enter the cave. So, I ran back as fast as I could until I found you searching for me in the forest." I asked him, "How did they look?" He said to me that their appearance was like that of humans, but their skin resembled that of lizards, and their eyes were completely black. After we returned home, my wife noticed the extreme fear on Naji's face. so she decided to take him to Sheikh Salim in the neighboring village. After her return, she told me that they still wanted to take him but could no longer kidnap him. I felt severe tension. I had thought that this problem was solved forever, but she told me that Sheikh Salim said the situation wasn't that dangerous. It's just a desperate attempt as long as he doesn't leave the house on nights of the full moon. One day, I woke up to the sound of the door opening. I hurried out of bed and went out of the room to find Naji standing in front of the door wanting to go out. Panic seized me because tonight is the night of the full moon. I screamed, "Naji!" He looked at me in panic and said, "Mom is outside, Father. I heard her calling me." I said to him, "Your mother is in the room, Naji. I told you not to leave the house for any reason." He said to me, "But I heard Mom's voice, believe me, Father." I told him, "Fine, go to your room now." One night, I heard Naji screaming. I rushed to him with my wife. He was terrified. I asked him, "What's wrong, my boy? Why all this screaming?" He answered fearfully, "When I was sleeping, I saw very frightening people and they wanted to take me with them." His mother said, "It's just a nightmare, dear." Naji replied, "It's the people I saw in the forest. Don't let them take me, Father." I slept beside him that night, but the matter kept recurring until we got used to it. Years passed this way, and Naji turned 15 while Lena was 10. One day after returning from the forest, my wife told me that Naji was extremely ill, so I rushed to his room. His temperature was high. My wife entered the room and told me she would take him to the doctor for treatment. She returned with Naji from the doctor and brought fever-reducing herbs. After a few days, Naji's health began to gradually improve. After 2 days of his recovery, my wife told me she would take him to the doctor again. It's clear that Naji is suffering from a skin disease, possibly from the heat. I will go see him about this. Look at his hand. I looked at his hand and saw a spot that looked strange and felt odd. I said, "Okay, go ahead, but don't be late." After she returned, she applied the herbs the doctor had given her to his hand, but the issue did not end. New spots began to appear on his skin. My wife went back to the doctor, and he gave her new treatment, telling her he had never seen a disease like this before, but the situation was worsening. The spots on his skin continued to spread, taking up most of his body. Not only that, but I noticed a change in some of his behavior. He no longer sits to eat with us. He doesn't eat at all. He's always anxious. I believe his psychological state is affected by his illness. One day, Naji came to sit beside me. He looked uneasy. I asked him, "What's wrong, Naji?" He told me, "Don't you notice, Father, that these spots look very much like their skin?" "Who are you talking about, my dear?" He said, "The people in the forest." I was shocked by his words. How did I not think of this before? I remembered what Naji had said 10 years ago. Their appearance is like that of humans, but their skin resembles that of lizards, and their eyes are completely black. These spots indeed look like lizard skin, but what does that mean? I will go tomorrow with Naji to Sheikh Salim. We haven't seen him in a long time. The next day we all went to Sheikh Salim, and I told him what had happened. When he saw the spots on Naji's skin, his face changed and he said, "This is what I feared." "What is it, Sheikh?" It was my wife who said that. Sheikh Salim replied, "I am not sure yet. I want to speak with you in private, Zayn." We went to another room. I said to him, "What's wrong, Sheikh? You've worried us." He said to me, "I hope my suspicions are not justified. I believe they want him to be one of them. Every child born on the night of the full moon becomes one of them." I asked him, "How will they make him one of them when they couldn't kidnap him and bring him to them?" He said, "Perhaps he is transforming to become one of them on his own." We left the room and I found my wife filled with anxiety and asking me, "What is it?" I told her we had to go now. After we got back home, Naji entered his room and I told my wife what Sheikh Salim had told me. She cried bitterly. Days passed, and the situation was still very dire to the point that Naji no longer left the house after the skin spots spread to his face. One day after returning home from work, I found my wife crying intensely in her room. I asked her, "What is it?" She said with a voice filled with tears, "Your son ate a chicken." I asked, "What's the problem?" She said, "Your son ate a live chicken. I noticed that the number of hens had been decreasing lately, and today I went to feed the chickens. I saw him in their room. I saw him breaking the chicken's neck, drinking its blood eagerly, then tearing it with his teeth and eating it. I couldn't control myself and rushed to my room crying. I didn't even dare to talk to him. I went to Naji in his room. He got up from his bed when he saw me. I sat beside him. His condition was terrible. His hair was falling out in clumps and the spots had spread to the gaps caused by the hair loss. What is this? Hadn't his eyes been like his mother's? Since when have they been black? I asked him some casual questions about his condition. Then I left him, realizing that it wouldn't be long before Naji became one of them. On one night of the full moon, my wife was at her sick mother's with Lena, and I was alone in the house with Naji. After midnight, I woke up to a sound in the room. When I opened my eyes, I found Naji, and he looked very frightening. He was larger, and fangs were protruding from his mouth. I screamed and backed away from him in panic. I asked him anxiously, "What do you want, Naji?" He answered in a frightening voice I had never heard before. "I want food. I want blood." He approached me, looking taller than me now, and I stepped back until I pressed against the wall. Is this my end? Will I die at the hands of my son? I noticed my bag on the ground beside me. I quickly grabbed it, and when Naji saw the white dirt Sheikh Salim had given me, he backed away and left the room. After he left, I placed some of the white dirt at the door and around the bed. I cannot believe I am afraid of my son. After a few moments, I heard the sound of our goat. I opened the door, holding some white dirt in my hand, and saw Naji sinking his teeth into the goat's neck, drinking its blood. He was tearing its flesh and eating it with his teeth. I couldn't sleep that night, and I was convinced that my son had become a monster. In the morning, my wife and Lena returned, and Naji was sleeping in the yard with blood all over his mouth. When my wife saw him, she screamed. Naji woke up, and he was in his normal size and appearance from the previous day. Without saying a word, he entered his room. The following night, we placed the white dirt at the door of our room and Lena's room. Naji had become a real threat. I couldn't sleep as usual in the recent period. I heard the sound of the door opening. I opened the room door slightly and saw Naji leaving the house. I closed the door and looked through a small opening in the window. I saw him sitting on the ground in front of the house. Suddenly, he lifted his eyes and looked at the window, seemingly seeing me. In a flash, his face pressed against the window from the outside, staring directly into my eyes. I quickly backed away from the window, and after a few minutes, I looked again to find him sitting there, staring at me as though he didn't want me to see him. I drew a curtain over the window and went to sleep. In the morning, I woke up to the screams of the villagers. I went out to find them gathered around the house. I asked them in surprise, "What is it? Why are you gathered here?" One of the neighbors replied, "All the animals in the village died last night. And why are you gathering around my house?" Another responded, "To put it simply, because your son ate them." I expected this. No one but my son does such a thing, and he had been outside all night. But I told them, "And who told you it's my son? Did any of you see him?" Another person responded, "No, but we all know he is your son. He is a monster, and we all know this. Even if you do not control your son, we will kill him or you will leave the village." Then they dispersed. I had nothing to say to them. 2 days after this incident, Sheikh Salim came to our house to check on Naji's condition. He brought with him some books and the white dirt he used to draw boundaries around our house 15 years ago. He entered Naji's room. As soon as Naji saw him, he jumped from the bed, showing signs of fear on his face. Sheikh Salim approached him and placed some of the white dirt on his forehead. Naji screamed and cursed Sheikh Salim. I didn't realize what I was doing until I struck him on the face, and in a minute all of his remaining hair fell before me, and his eyes turned completely black. In a sudden rush, he ran out of the house, and I quickly followed but couldn't find him anywhere. It was as if he had evaporated. "What happened, Sheikh Salim? Where did Naji go? Why did you put that dirt on his forehead?" Sheikh Salim said, "Your son has become one of them, Zayn. He did not leave because he hoped to find a victim here. He needed to feel threatened to leave." My wife began to cry intensely, striking her face and saying, "I want my son." And Lena was crying beside her, trying to comfort her. I asked him, "But we must get him back, Sheikh. I must get my son back." He said, "No, Zayn. There is no way to return Naji. He has become one of them. We should have left him with them since he was an infant. The matter is not as we thought. They are not just a tribe who wants to take your children. This is a curse on your village and all its inhabitants. Anyone born on the night of the full moon transforms to become a monster, and if they do not take him, he will change while he is among you, and he will be a source of threat to your lives. This is your fate, and it will haunt you forever." Then he pointed to the books and continued, "These books confirm what I'm saying. They tell the history of your village and more than one experience for more than one person in different times who lived in this village. It is said that the original inhabitants of the village used black magic to achieve their revenge. 30 nights after your ancestors came to the village, one of the women gave birth to a child on a night of the full moon. But he was so monstrous that his parents could not bear to look at him. So they decided to get rid of him and threw him into the wilderness. After a while, another child was born like this, and his parents had to throw him into the wilderness. And people began to notice that the child born on a full moon night was only the one who turned into a monster. They resorted to magic to rid themselves of this curse, and they thought they succeeded in doing so because the babies were born normally. But they were kidnapped on the very night they were born. One night, a man was returning home and the villagers heard his screams. They went out to find him torn to pieces with some of his limbs missing. This incident happened more than once, and as these incidents repeated, they noticed that all of them occurred only when the moon was full. So they stopped going out on full moon nights, and the children born on this night are kidnapped, no matter how hard they tried to stop it. And every newcomer to the village suffers the curse and will never escape it. The injustices of your ancestors will pursue you, Zayn. Those you fight and kill are nothing but your children and siblings born on the night of the full moon. After this night, I made an important decision. We would leave this village forever. I know it is a difficult decision, as we have nothing but this house that shelters us, and we do not know anywhere in the world except our village where we were born and spent our whole lives. I don't even know how to make a living other than cutting trees, but it is better than seeing my son eating human flesh. We began to pack our belongings in preparation for departure after 2 nights, to avoid the full moon nights. My wife didn't want to leave, but I convinced her that this is better, at least for Lena, and it is the best choice. After 2 days, I bought a horse with all the money I had, and when evening came, we moved away from the house. Lena rode the horse with our belongings while my wife and I walked. When we reached the edge of the village, the horse stumbled and threw Lena off. I helped her get up and put our belongings back on the horse, which refused to move and started braying loudly. I struck it to get it to move, but it wouldn't budge. I noticed someone moving quickly. I lowered Lena from the horse and told them to run quickly out of the village. My wife said, "What about our belongings and the horse?" I told her the horse wouldn't move, and we can't carry our belongings without it. We began to run quickly, but saw people whose features we couldn't distinguish in the darkness. They were tall. The shortest among them approached us. He appeared to be the height of an ordinary human. He said, "Didn't I tell you that anyone living in this village becomes cursed and that it will never leave?" I said in disbelief, "Sheikh Salim, what are you doing here? And why are you with them?" He laughed loudly and said, "Because I am their lord." I said to him, "Do you mean that you have been deceiving us all this time? But you helped us in many situations." He said to me, "You fool. I was helping you to get what I wanted." I said, "But why?" He replied, "I told you when your ancestors wronged my ancestors. They were expelled from their village, and you inherited the village. As for me, I inherited revenge. That's how justice is achieved. I tried to return, but I collided with tall figures behind me. My wife and Lena were crying and holding on to me. Sheikh Salim said, "Do not try to flee. You know the rules. Whoever knows the truth must die." I said, "Fine, kill me if you must. Just let my wife and daughter go." He said, "I haven't asked you for your last wish, don't worry. Tonight, you and your wife and daughter will die, along with all the villagers." He gestured with his hand, and they moved towards us. I felt like I was suffocating. I could no longer see anything, as though I had fallen into a deep well. In a police station in one of the cities. "Sir, dismembered bodies have been found in a village near the forest." "How many bodies were there?" "About 2,000. All the villagers are dead. It seems that there are ferocious animals in this forest." There was a Japanese man who had grown tired of his wife. When they had gotten married, she was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen, with long black hair, beautiful brown eyes, and soft skin. However, over the years, her looks had faded, and she had grown fat. Her face had become wrinkled. He realized that he wasn't attracted to her anymore and decided to leave her. The man told his wife he wanted a divorce and promptly moved out of the house. He rented an apartment in the city and took to visiting bars and clubs in search of a new romance. It wasn't long until he met a stunningly beautiful young girl. She was only 18 years old, tall and slim with long flowing blonde hair. He was instantly smitten, and within weeks he had asked her to marry him. The blonde girl accepted, and after they got married, she moved in with him. However, as soon as the ring was on her finger, the blonde girl's behavior changed. Before the wedding, she had been sweet, pleasant, and polite. But now her attitude was hard, mean, and rude. She was very vain and seemed to spend hours in front of the mirror, preening, applying makeup, and gazing at her own reflection. She was also very demanding and made him spend all of his money on her. She forced him into buying her new clothes, new jewelry, new gadgets, and a new car. One day, the man came home and took a good look at his new wife. All of the makeup, the eyeliner, the mascara, the eyeshadow, only hid the ugliness inside. He began to wish he had never married her. As the years went on, the man started longing for his old wife. She may have been old and overweight, but she had been a caring and considerate person. He cried when he remembered her soft voice, her gentle smile, and her eternal patience. He regretted the day he had divorced her. He gradually realized that he still loved his first wife, loved her more than he could ever love the blonde girl. He began to understand how he had thrown away the only woman who ever truly loved him. Sometimes, in his dreams, he would see his old wife, sitting alone in her room, her long black hair covering her face. Late at night, he would ask himself how she was living, what she was doing. Would she ever take him back? One night, after a bitter argument, he decided that he had endured enough. He couldn't take it anymore and left his blonde wife. He left the city and mad Eth a long journey back to his old wife's house. When he reached the street where they used to live, it was already late at night. The house looked deserted. Tall weeds were growing in the garden and the windows were cracked and broken. Tiles were missing from the roof and the walls looked as if they hadn't been painted in years. He knocked on the front door, but no one answered. Then he tried the handle and found that the door wasn't locked. He walked inside and found the rooms empty and silent. A chilly wind was blowing through the broken windows. Going upstairs, he opened the door to the bedroom and was startled to see his wife sitting there on the bed. He ran to her, embraced her in his arms, and cried on her shoulder. Through the tears, he told her how much he had missed her over the years and begged her to forgive him for leaving her. Her face was covered by her long black hair, but he heard her sweet voice whispering in his ear. She told him, "I'm glad you came back to me," she said, "if only for a moment." "Only for a moment?" he replied with a laugh. "I'm back for good. Now we can spend the rest of our lives together." He brushed the hair from her face and leaned in to kiss her. But when he opened his eyes, he screamed in horror. Her face was a dirty, moldering skull. To his horror, he realized that what he was clutching in his arms was nothing but a sack of dusty, old bones and long, stringy black hair. The man scrambled to his feet and tossed the bones away from him in disgust. He stood there in the dim light, shuddering as a sickening feeling spread throughout his body. He ran downstairs and out the front door. On the street, he found a neighbor and demanded to know who lived in the old, broken-down and abandoned house. "There is no one living in that house now," said the neighbor. "Years ago, it belonged to a woman whose husband left her. He divorced her in order to marry another woman. She was so distraught that she killed herself soon afterwards." The Psycho is a scary story about a girl who starts dating a new guy. Her friends tell her there is something wrong with him, but she ignores their warnings. My name is Dasha, and I want to tell you a story about my last boyfriend. We met at university. We accidentally bumped into each other in the hallway. He asked me to go for coffee with him, and I agreed. He told me his name was Norman. We talked about this and that. He was handsome and witty. I was very attracted to him, and before long we were dating. Norman was very sensitive and caring guy, not like my previous boyfriends. It was like he was from another planet. He was always interested in what I wanted, always concerned about my needs. But at the same time, he was very masculine. I felt safe with him. Everything was fine at first. It was my friend's birthday, and our whole group gathered in a bar to celebrate. I was excited because I brought Norman and I wanted to introduce him to everyone. Sitting at the table, we were having fun, drinking and laughing. Then some of the guys went outside to smoke, and Norman went with them. They were gone for 5 minutes, and when they returned, I was approached by my friend Simon. "Dasha, I think there's something wrong with this Norman guy," he said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well, he's kind of strange. He started talking about his mother, saying really weird things. Then he started giggling like an idiot for no reason. He's not normal." "Norman? Not normal? Are you sure?" I said. Of course, I spoke with Norman about it, but he denied everything. He said my guy friends were just jealous of our relationship and they were trying to drive a wedge between us. I believed him, especially since Simon had asked me out on a date one time and I had to turn him down. It was possible that he just wanted to turn me against Norman and get rid of his competition. But the more time I spent with Norman, the more I started to notice some strange behavior. Sometimes, he would get a faraway look in his eyes and go silent for a few minutes. Then he would start talking again as if nothing had happened. And he began to call me Mommy. I put up with his little eccentricities because everything else in the relationship was wonderful. And then something happened. It was like a bolt from the blue. One day he kidnapped me. We at my house and my parents were out. I went upstairs to get something. All of a sudden I felt him grab me from behind, and he put a handkerchief over my nose and mouth. It was soaked in some kind of chemical, and within seconds I blacked out. When I woke up, I was in some shabby apartment with a dirty rag stuffed in my mouth. My arms and legs were tied to the bed, and I had a terrible headache. Norman came in. He put his finger to his lips and pulled the rag from my mouth. I immediately screamed, and Norman slapped me across the face really hard. "Don't you dare cry," he growled. "My mother never cried, okay?" He untied my hands and gave me a withering look. He told me that if I tried to run away, things would only get worse. Norman took me into the kitchen and sat me down at the table. He put a plate of food in front of me and told me to eat. All this time, he did not take his eyes off me for a second, so I just did as I was told. When I looked into Norman's eyes, I could see he was a complete psycho. How could I have not seen this in him before? He smiled at me, as if everything was normal. "How are things at work, Mommy?" he asked. I had no other choice but to play along with him. "All good," I replied. "So we'll go on holiday together next week?" "Of course," I mumbled. "Oh, by the way, someone told me you have a new man in your life, Mommy." "That's not true, is it? You wouldn't do that to me, would you, Mommy?" I saw how angrily he was staring at me. "No," I replied. "Well, I knew it wasn't true. He grinned. We don't need anybody else. We're happy together, just me and you. After I finished eating, he took me into the bedroom and forced me onto the bed. He tied my hands, put a gag in my mouth, and left. This was how my nightmare began. Sometimes Norman remained with me for a long time, telling me how things were going in college. He always called me Mom or Mommy. I went along with it because I was afraid of what he might do if I resisted. If I made one mistake, he would beat me terribly. I was stuck in that dingy apartment for 6 whole days. My room was always locked and there was no clock, so I had to guess what time it was. Norman would come and go. I don't know where he got the money, but he always brought me food and sweets. He said, "I love my mother and I want to make her happy. A boy's best friend is his mother." I knew that this couldn't go on. My parents and my friends were probably worried sick. I wondered if they had contacted the police already. I wondered if anyone was looking for me. One time I tried to reason with him. I tried to explain that I was not his mother and he needed to let me go, but he beat me again like crazy. On the 6th day, Norman woke me up as usual and told me he was going out to buy us breakfast. I heard the front door close and I started trying to free myself. I felt that I could move my right hand a little. The ropes were not very tight. It took about 20 minutes, but I managed to work it free. I quickly untied myself and rushed to the door, but of course I was firmly locked. I looked out the window. I was on the 5th floor. I grabbed a chair and threw it at the window. With a loud crash, the glass broke and the chair landed on the pavement outside, almost hitting some passers-by. Leaning out the window, I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Help me! He's going to kill me! Help! He's a psycho!" And then I saw him. Norman was standing in the street with a bag in his hand, glaring up at me. By the look in his eyes, I knew the only thing he wanted now was to kill me. People were gathering under the window, so my crazy boyfriend just turned and ran off. 10 minutes later, a police car arrived. The officers broke down the door and rescued me. I will never forget the look in my parents' eyes when they took me home. I spent the rest of the night weeping uncontrollably. It turned out that the police were already looking for Norman. He was on the run from the authorities long before he met me. He was wanted for a double murder. His name wasn't even Norman, it was Ed, and he was actually 30 years old. He had a history of mental illness and had been in and out of insane asylums for most of his life. 2 years before, he had been living with his mother. He was completely obsessed with her. His mother was dating a man, and she brought him home with her one night. When Norman caught them together, he flew into a violent rage. He beat both of them to death with a hammer and then just disappeared. I hope the police will find him soon because until they do, I am too scared to leave my house. If you want my advice, be careful who you date. There is a small village on the island of Hawaii called Ola'a. Nobody would ever guess the terrible secret this village holds, following the accidental drowning of a young boy many years ago. Today, the tragedy still haunts the villagers and their children. Back in 1947, a group of kids were playing on the banks of a deep pond outside the village. One boy accidentally tripped over a log and fell into the water with a splash before any of the other children could react. The boy sank beneath the water's shimmering surface. For a few moments, they waited for him to resurface, but there was no sign of him. Horrified, they ran back to the village to get help. Some local men came as fast as they could and dived into the pond, searching for the young boy. They were terrified by what they found. The boy was sitting on a rock at the very bottom of the pond. His arms were hanging down by his sides, and his body was swaying back and forth with the currents. His eyes were wide and his mouth was hanging open. But he was dead in the water. The eerie sight sent shivers down the spines of the men who had dived in to save him. They were deeply disturbed and said it was such an unusual way to drown. It was as if the boy had calmly sat down on the rock and waited there to die. They retrieved the corpse and dragged it onto the bank of the pond. Everyone who lived in the village was saddened by the tragedy, but after the funeral they tried to put the strange death behind them. Afterwards, bizarre rumors began to spread around the area. In the middle of the night, Villagers would hear unexplained screams and cries coming from the direction of the pond. At first, they tried to tell themselves that the haunting cries were just caused by the wind blowing through the tall trees. However, as time went on, some people started to report disturbing experiences. Whenever people walked past the pond at night, they would feel something reaching out and trying to grab their feet. Many villagers believed that the ghost of the drowned boy lurked beneath the dark waters of the pond. They said that at night he would come to the surface, cold, wet, and shivering, his icy hands clutching at unsuspecting victims and trying to pull them into his watery grave. According to the rumors, he was trapped in this world by accident, and the only way he could escape was to find someone else to take his place at the bottom of the pond. One day, a boy was out walking with his father. When they passed by the haunted pond, the boy picked up some stones and skimmed them across the surface of the water. Suddenly, the boy screamed out in terror. Something was holding his leg and dragging him into the pond. The boy clawed at the earth, trying to hold on, but it was no use. Before his father had a chance to grab hold of him, the boy was pulled down into the watery depths. The desperate father jumped into the pond and tried to find his son, but there was no trace of him. Minutes later, he dived deeper and finally located the young boy. He was sitting on a rock on the bottom of the pond, arms placidly at his side, eyes and mouth wide open, swaying gently to and fro in the current. The father grasped his son and pulled him up to the surface. He made his way to the edge of the pond, dragging his son behind him like a dead weight. Luckily, the father had taken some courses in first aid, and there, on the bank, he was able to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on his son. The man did everything he could, and finally, just when he was about to give up, he saw his son's chest rise and fall, and the boy coughed up all the water in his lungs. The boy was alive. After that, all of the parents in the village warned their children to stay away from the pond. A priest was brought in to bless the waters, and the local people felt that would put an end to the haunting. However, on particularly dark nights, when the evening skies were as black as ink, those who lived closest to the pond claimed that they could still hear the boy's terrifying screams. Some say that he will never find peace. Nowadays, nobody dares to venture close to the pond, and every child in the village knows the story of the drowned boy. No one knows when the ghost will once again grow restless and try to claim another young life.
My story may be hard to believe, and some may think it's imaginative or accuse me of being crazy. But listen to it. Perhaps it will change your mind. It all started when my family and I went to a distant place to get away from people and enjoy the beauty and tranquility of nature. The place was incredibly quiet and beautiful. Despite much of the house's belongings being destroyed, it captivated attention. The renovations we decided to undertake would turn the place into a paradise, and I couldn't wait for the day I would live in the place I had dreamed of since childhood. Let me begin by describing the new house upon our arrival. The house had 2 floors and resembled a palace from the outside, with flowers on all sides, although it needed a lot of attention since it had become overgrown. But imagine it after we trim it. A spacious garden and a parking space, along with a backyard, featuring a swing hanging from a huge tree, which I bet has been there much longer than the house itself. There was a lake, or I don't know what it was, but its water was suitable for a little swim, and there was a room by its shore. And I was planning to convince my dad to let me use it as a workspace for my painting. That was outside the house. Inside, the first floor had a kitchen, which I didn't prefer because the design made me feel observed while I was inside. What if I broke something? I wouldn't be able to hide it. There was also a guest reception room, a living room, and a dining room with a huge table that I could imagine kings dining upon. The bathroom was stunning, and the balcony opened to the backyard. The furniture and the way it was arranged gave the impression that this house belonged to wealthy people of fine taste. However, the walls needed repainting. Although the patterns on them were beautiful and colourful, they were deteriorating. As for the room by the beach, it was filled with repair tools, wood and metal, as if it were the house's garbage dump. But I insisted on making it my kingdom, and I would put in my utmost effort to do so. The second floor had 3 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom, a playroom for children, and a room with exercise equipment. Not only that, but there was also a small room on top of the house with a glass ceiling, as if the owner loved to contemplate the sky, alongside a room beneath the house to store old items. After we finished moving our stuff to the new house and we started to renovate it, repainting and decorating it with flowers, it indeed became breathtaking. I forgot to tell you that I put some birds in each balcony, and I can't describe how comforting it felt. At sunset by the lake, with my coffee and the sound of the chirping birds. It was beautiful, like paradise. School started, and our lives became wonderful, despite the place being really far, and I came back home at 8 o'clock. The little hours I studied were sufficient and more, as if the tranquility in nature helped me absorb information. The days repeated themselves and nothing new happened, but we all awaited the day of the weekend Friday, not for outings and leisure, but because it was the day my piano journey began. I would buy every new score and play it on my day off. What a beautiful life it was back then. But life doesn't remain the same. After the first part of the year passed, and we reached the mid-semester vacation, flames began to open up. It all started when I began preparing the outer room by the beach, clearing it of everything, and starting to put my supplies and tools in it. And I began decorating the walls. But strangely, I found strange, incomprehensible writings on the back wall of the closet, along with bizarre drawings and handprints. I started trying to read what was written to understand, but nothing made sense. What is this nonsense? But who knows? Let's do some spooky work to scare my friends a little, to make them think I'm living in a witch's house. I laughed, and indeed took pictures, starting to convince my friends that something weird was happening in that room. I posted the pictures on my social media, and friends really started believing it. But I gradually forgot about that until something happened. After the return to school, everything returned to the usual daily routine. However, I spent most of my time in my outer room, or what I called my kingdom. My friend would come to sleep over, and we'd study together, watch films, and do everything. One day, we decided to watch a new horror movie that caused a huge buzz. We turned off the lights and actually watched it. After it ended, we recalled it, laughed hysterically, and wondered why people were afraid of such movies. But then we heard a sound from the water, and at first we were startled, but we steadied ourselves and pretended to be brave as we went outside to see what was happening. We took a flashlight and went out. I assure you, I thought I saw someone in the water, but I quickly turned on the flashlight to see what it was, and I found nothing. Suddenly, a tree branch appeared in the water. We laughed and went back into the room to sleep. The next day, I found a horrible smell in the place, but I didn't pay much attention. I went to college and returned to find my dad asking me how I had not noticed the cat that was dead beside the door of my room. I was very surprised when it died and how it got here, but I stayed silent and went into my room, overwhelmed with university work. I always asked myself, why do professors give us assignments due on the same date and leave the rest of the days free? They should distribute it. I couldn't sleep until there were 2 hours left before I had to go to college and hadn't finished. I felt so sleepy. I must brew some coffee from home and return to finish studying. I left the room to hear the same sound in the water. I turned around and felt something in the water, telling myself it was just exhaustion, and went to the house to get coffee. Indeed, I went, but when I returned, I found a dead bird in front of the room, and I was horrified by the sight. I went to the room to get something to put it in to bury it far away. But when I stepped out, I saw someone standing at the beginning of the beach. The place was dark, so I thought it was my dad. I went to see what he was doing here, but I didn't see my dad. I found a man with a burned face. His appearance was terrifying. His face was bloody and distorted, with no features visible except for his bulging eyes that instilled fear in the heart. I screamed in front of my parents' room and didn't feel anything afterward. I woke up in my bedroom with my dad beside me. He asked me what happened, and I started to tell him what had happened. And he calmed me down, saying it was just exhaustion, and he would help me with everything left. He indeed helped me with everything left and took me to college. I submitted my work to the professors and left with my dad, returning home. Things started to worsen. Every day I saw him and found dead animals beside my room until I decided never to go there again. But it didn't end there. He followed me everywhere, and he started chasing me in my dreams. But it got to the point that whenever something happened in my dreams, I would find it in the morning. I dreamed that he came and was running after me until he grabbed my hand, only to find my hand burning. I would scream in pain and find my dad waking me up. When I looked at my hand, I found the burn mark. But if I told my dad, he wouldn't believe me. What should I do? What would have happened if my dad hadn't woken me up? Would I have burned completely? Or would he have killed me? Why is he burning me? Does he want to burn me like him? What did I do to him? After a few days, the burns he left on my body began to increase, and I became afraid to sleep. I occupied myself talking with friends, but my attention was drawn to a strange website about a man claiming to know everything and talking about symbols and signs that summon spirits. At that time, I remembered the symbols on the walls of the room. I searched for the picture I had taken of those symbols, printed it, and sent it to him, asking if those symbols had any meaning. Surprisingly, although his assistants usually replied to messages, he answered himself, asking for my phone number and insisting that we meet urgently because he needed the picture I sent him. We set a time and place, and I indeed went. When he saw me, he said he wanted to know every detail of what happened since that night. I started recounting what happened, including the prank I had pulled, but I didn't tell him about the burned man. He asked me, "Is that all that happened?" As if he knew what was happening to me. Suddenly, he began examining my features, which started to show signs of tension from remembering those burns, and without intending to, I held my hand where the burn was. He then asked me, "What's the cause of this burn?" I couldn't answer for a moment. When I was about to tell a lie to escape, he said, "Did anyone else see it?" Those words struck me like a bolt of lightning. Does he know the cause of the burns? Does he know what is happening to me? I became lost in thought until he repeated the question. I answered, "I don't know. The first time I saw him was with my friend, but I don't know if she saw him." He asked me if we read what was written on the wall. Did I read it from the wall or not? I thought for a moment, then answered, "No, I read it from the wall, but she wasn't with me." She came after painting the room. Suddenly, his expression changed, and he jumped up, saying, "We need to go to her quickly. Can you contact her?" I replied that she hadn't answered in 2 days. He asked, "Do you know where she lives?" I nodded in response without speaking. He grabbed me and said, "Let's go quickly." We got into the car, and on the way, he asked, "Does she live alone?" I said no. He then asked, "And you?" I said, "My dad." "What's happening?" I asked, but he didn't answer. He said, "Just call him and tell him not to approach that room, no matter what happens." I said, "What's happening?" He replied, "Just tell him." There's no time. So I called my dad and told him that. To confirm, I told him I needed him to go somewhere we could go together, and that I would meet him there. A little more than half an hour later, my dad called to ask where I was. I said I needed him to wait because the place was crowded. We arrived at my friend's house and knocked on the door, but no one answered, although we could hear sounds of moaning and an awful smell. I looked at him, not understanding anything as we tried to open the door. When we did, we found her in the middle of the room, but she was on fire. We rushed to extinguish the fire, raging inside, and called the ambulance, which came to take her away. As I was about to go be with her, he pulled me back, saying there was no time. If I wanted to save her and myself, we needed to leave now. We got into the car, and I said, "What's happening? I want to know what is happening to me." He started to explain. "You began this story unintentionally, but it seems that someone who lived in your house is trying to summon a spirit for some reason. This spirit died in an accident, and he was the one making those markings and writings to awaken him in an ancient way, something we call witchcraft and magic. But those rituals stopped with his death. When you read those words, you summoned him again. However, when he returns through someone he doesn't know, he makes that person suffer the torment he died in, but doesn't kill him." I paused for a moment thinking, then said, "So he died burned, and he tortures me with my burns, but it will continue like this, and he won't kill me?" He confirmed my words. I then asked, "But what about her? Why did he burn her as well? She didn't read anything." He replied, "Yes, but when he appeared to you, she was with you. Her fate is death." I protested, "So she dies, and I continue to suffer?" He assured me he was there to help me. "We'll go to the house, to the place he appeared in, and the place where those things were written." I said, "But the paint?" He responded, "It doesn't matter. We need to go and I'll handle it." I asked, "What should I do?" He said, "You'll know." I fell silent until we reached the house. I guided him to the place, and he began to say incomprehensible words. Suddenly, I lost consciousness. I woke up in the same room, but alone. I started calling for him, but he didn't answer. He wasn't there. I left the room to find the place different. I don't know how, but the house seemed different. The flowers and the lake and the tree looked smaller than they used to. What is happening? I saw a man running toward me quickly. I asked him what was happening, but he couldn't hear me. He ran and entered the room, closing the door tightly. But others appeared, running and banging on the door violently. When he didn't open it, they said if he didn't open it, they'd burn him. They indeed set a fire, waiting for him to exit, but he didn't. They tried to extinguish the fire, but they failed, and their screams for the man went louder as they tried to put it out, but to no avail. After a while, they extinguished the fire, only to find him dead. When I looked, my God, It was him with the bulging eyes. But what is happening? The story didn't end there. They said they wouldn't imprison him for something they didn't mean to do. They took the burned man, tied him to a tree branch, and threw him into the water. But he was still alive, struggling to move despite the horrible burns. They neglected his pleas for help and declared he was dead for sure and left him to drown. That same branch I had seen for the first time, now I understood the story. Then I saw his father, I think, returning to the house after the other murderers had fled, searching for his son, finding nothing, and seeing the burned room. He decided to bring him back, revived him, and they lived until the father died. After that, people feared buying the house, believing it was haunted by spirits and ghosts, until my dad came and bought it. I entered the room, read what was written, and then everything began to fade. I returned to reality again, trying to tell him what happened, but he didn't listen. I said, "Where is he?" He asked. I said he was in the water. He said I had to bury him to end the matter, but I said I couldn't swim. He looked at me and said, "Impossible. I will not go down to see him again." I replied, "Do you want your friend to die? What would happen to your dad if he saw him with you and experienced what happened to her? Would you like to suffer for the rest of your life?" I shook my head in denial. He said, "So, what are you waiting for?" I took a deep breath, then jumped into the water to search for him. And indeed, I found him. I was about to scream and surfaced from the water to tell him he was really there. He said, "Try to free him from what prevents him from rising so I can help you pull him up." I went down, released him from the branch, and resurfaced along with him. We looked at his scorched and bluish body from choking on the water, an unforgettable sight. We pulled him out after tying him with a rope and began to bury him. The ordeal ended there, and I returned to recount what happened to me. But I asked, "Why didn't he show up after I read those things?" He replied, "He was watching you, waiting for your weakness to exploit your fear and destroy you. He is a terrible thing, like the devil, but everything is over. Forget what happened." I said, "But how can I forget? How can I forget with the burns on my hands? How can I forget my friend who didn't survive the fire? How can I forget?"
It was an ordinary day like any other. I woke up in the morning, prepared breakfast, and sat down to eat while reading the newspaper. After a while, the doorbell rang. I headed toward the door, saying, Coming, just a minute." I opened the door but found no one there. I was about to turn and close the door again when I caught a glimpse of a small box on the doorstep. The box was medium-sized, brown, and had raised lines on it, but its shape was frightening because they resembled human veins. The box looked strange but distinctive. I picked it up and went inside, wondering who had sent me this strange box and what was inside it. I opened the box, curious to see what it contained, and found a pile of leather that resembled the leather used for winter coats. The leather was very soft and had a strange mix of white and red, and when I looked closer, my heart nearly stopped from fear because this leather was not synthetic. It was genuine human skin. Yes, human skin, as if it had been removed from a human body. I felt a wave of terror, but I noticed a folded letter underneath the leather along with an agenda. I set the leather aside and took the letter and the agenda. I quickly opened the agenda and found it contained names of people and dates next to each name, with several pages of text between each name. I thought to myself, I don't have time to read all of this. I'll open the first letter to find out who sent me this strange box, and then I'll read what's inside the agenda. I opened the letter and began to read. "Dear Mark, I'm sure you were terrified when you learned the truth about the skin in your hands. But believe me, when you know the truth behind its story, you will die of fear. Let me introduce myself. I am Kamal, the the top of your class, and because you were the son of a doctor, I was rejected for a university position and you were hired instead. I want to say that you were one of the reasons for my misery in life. You and your father ruined my future and deprived me of the chance to teach at the university because of your father's influence. But there's no time to talk too much about the past, because this letter won't be enough for me to discuss that. I have something more important to tell you about this special gift. I will now tell you the truth about the strange skin in your hands. After I graduated, I tried to work with my degree, but all doors were closed in my face. In the end, I became a sales representative. It was a very exhausting job that required me to travel a lot all over Egypt. One day they asked me to travel to Alexandria to meet some clients, but I was delayed in that city, so I decided to stay the night. I went to the nearest hotel and thanked God that it looked old, which meant the fare would be low. The hotel had wooden floors throughout, and there was a foul smell wafting from every corner. At that moment, all I cared about was sleeping and not anything else. "Room 414, sir," said the receptionist while yawning and handing me the key. I went up to the room, and as soon as I saw the bed, I threw myself onto it and fell into a deep sleep. I woke up startled from sleep hearing that sound. The sound was coming from the room directly below mine. Maybe someone was sick and in pain. The sound was of someone in pain, crying at the same time, and it was clear they were trying to stifle their agony. I knocked on the floor of the room, and don't forget I told you it was made of wood, so the sound travels easily. I called out, "Hey sir, the one below, do you want me to call an ambulance? Are you okay?" No one responded. I repeated my call and knocked harder on the floor than before. "I'm fine, sir. Thanks. You can continue sleeping." That was the response I got from below, but the strange thing was that it was a girl's voice. Yes, a girl's voice, and very delicate too. I didn't think much of it and went back to sleep. Morning came, bringing with it my time to leave the hotel. I packed my bag and went downstairs. While I was leaving, I thought I would stop by the room where I heard the sound to check on her. Maybe she really needed help. I don't know why I did that. She wasn't my neighbor to check on her. She was just a guest at a hotel, but something was pulling me to go see her and make sure she was okay. When I reached in front of her room, I found her door old like all the other hotel doors, but strangely the door had some weird scratches on it. I asked myself in astonishment, what made those scratches? But I didn't waste time thinking and knocked on the door. "Miss, I'm the guest in the room above yours. Are you okay? I just wanted to check on you." Suddenly, the door swung open violently, and I found angry eyes staring at me. I controlled my nerves and tried to hide my fear while speaking to the one who opened the door. It was a middle-aged girl with somewhat delicate features, but her eyes were incredibly furious. Her red eyes looked as if she hadn't slept for a long time, and they were terrifying. "I'm Kamal, your neighbor from upstairs. Are you okay now?" she said in an annoyed tone. "I'm fine. Next time, mind your own business," she said, and then closed the door in my face. I thought to myself, what a strange and frightening person. I was wrong to come down and check on her. I continued down the stairs and handed in my room key. When I asked the receptionist about the name of this guest, he said, looking annoyed, "Her name is Sama, and it's better if you mind your own business. Since when do guests check on each other?" I gathered my things and left, thinking it was good that I finished my work and was heading back to Cairo. Then my phone rang. It was my boss, Mr. Ali, asking me to go to a client to finalize some procedures. I had no choice but to accept. There was no option for me to find another hotel to stay in that night, so I returned to the hotel again. I asked the receptionist to book me an extra night. I didn't know that this extra night would change my life completely, and that all the secrets were about to emerge. The day passed quickly. I finished my work and returned to the hotel to rest. Just like the night before, I threw myself on the bed and fell into a deep sleep. I woke up to the same sound, the sound of pain mixed with crying. It seemed this was going to continue every night. I won't lie, I was curious to know what was happening. So I put my ear to the floor and listened to the sound. The pain and crying were still ongoing. I called out to her, "Miss, would you like me to call an ambulance?" The moaning and crying continued. I thought I had to take action. Her voice reached me, angry, screaming, "I told you to mind your own business." Honestly, I should have listened to her. If I had heard her voice then, I would have been terrified and kept to myself, but unfortunately, I didn't do that. At first, I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't because the sound of pain and crying persisted. In the midst of my confusion and curiosity about the girls suffering below, I noticed a small opening in the wooden floor. At that moment, I had an idea I would have never thought of if I were in another situation. I could look through it and see what was happening. I don't know how I did it, but curiosity was overwhelming. I placed my eye on the opening and looked. What I saw was terrifying. Something frightening, something you wouldn't wish to see your whole life. Sama was writhing on the floor in a strange way, crawling like a snake. Her body was completely tense, her limbs moving in all directions frighteningly. Despite all this, she continued to scream in pain. Her features were changing in a strange way. Her hair was turning white, while her face looked like that of an old woman full of wrinkles and cracks. This was not the girl I met today. Yes, it was Sama, but she was transforming before my eyes. Was she human, a ghost, or something else? I no longer understood what I was seeing. It was something I had never seen in my entire life. After a while of her strange behavior and the pain mixed with crying, I saw her stand up and walk normally toward the wardrobe. She opened the wardrobe and pulled out a box. A medium-sized brown box with ridges like human veins. Yes, what I thought about now was real. It was the box you have. But before you do anything you'll regret, let me finish the rest of the story so you know what this box is. At that moment, Sama opened the box and took out a pile of skin. The skin was a strange color, a mixture of white and red, and cautiously she spread the skin on the floor. My blood froze in my veins as the skin spread out. The skin stretched and took the shape of a human body. What is this? Human skin. Complete human skin. All the features were there, specifically the same features as Sama, the same face, the same hands, the same legs. It was like a skin version of her. Calmly, she lay down beside the skin and touched it with her hands. Sama's body seemed to be being pulled and entering into the empty skin. In a few minutes, her entire body was inside the empty skin, while her old body transformed into a pile of skin. The cursed skin. She stood up, and her beautiful features returned, a sense of relief spreading across her face. She placed the empty skin inside the box and closed the wardrobe. Suddenly, I found her looking up, looking at me as if she could see me. I quickly ran back to my bed, my heart racing. "You up there?" she called out to me. I pretended to be asleep and didn't respond. She called out once, twice, and 3 times, but each time I remained silent. Eventually she stopped, and only silence remained. The terrifying silence. The hours passed slowly as I kept thinking about what I had seen and what it meant. Could she be a demon, a practitioner of black magic, or even a creature from another world? I really had no idea what was beneath me. I stayed awake all night, waiting for her to pounce on me at any moment because I had seen something I shouldn't have seen. Surely she wouldn't leave me alone, she would attack me from anywhere. I sat in the room, my mind about to explode from overthinking, too afraid to open the door because I might find her right in front of me. Yes, that's what happens in every horror movie. The night dragged on, and finally morning came, bringing a sense of safety. I focused my hearing on the room below until I heard the door opening and closing. She must have gone out now. Curiosity was killing me, along with fear. I left my room and headed toward her room, standing in front of the door. You're probably wondering why I went back to her room. I don't know. I found myself heading to her room as if I were under a spell. All that occupied my mind was the need to look closely at that box. As I told you, the door was old, and a gentle push would surely open it. I hesitated for a moment, but eventually I pushed the door and entered. I hurried towards the wardrobe. When I opened it, I found the agenda and the box. The strange brown box was right in front of me now. I took it, opened it, and felt the skin. It really had a strange texture. I quickly closed the box and asked myself whether to take it or leave it. There was no time for hesitation. I had to make up my mind. She could return at any moment. Unfortunately, I took the box and went back to my room. I didn't know why I took it, but I knew that it contained a frightening secret. I decided to leave the hotel and take the box with me. I settled my bill and got into a taxi. But on the way, I kept thinking about what would happen to the girl when she returned and found the skin missing. Curiosity returned to me. I had to know. So I asked the taxi driver to take me back to the hotel. As soon as the receptionist saw me, he frowned and said, "Did you forget something?" I tried to smile and said, "I got a call from my boss. He wants me to finish some work too. Please book me another night, and I'd prefer the same room." I sat in the room by the opening in the floor, waiting for Summer's return. After a long wait, night came again, and I saw the door of the room below open. Finally, she was back, and exhaustion was clearly visible on her face. Minutes passed, and she began to writhe in pain. Her hair started to turn white, and her features changed rapidly. The same thing that happened the previous night happened again. When she went to the wardrobe and opened it, no, who took the box? She screamed loudly, breaking everything in the room as if she had turned into a raging beast. Fangs and claws began to appear, like the vampires we see in movies. Suddenly, she stopped, as if she remembered something. She looked up at me, blood dripping from her mouth. Her eyes met mine. This was definitely not a human, she was a demon. With a terrifying scream and all her strength, she jumped towards me. I threw myself backward, afraid she would break through the ground and come after me. I heard a loud thud, enough to loosen one of the floorboards. I ran and stood by the door to escape quickly if she broke through the room's floor. The screaming began to lessen one by one. Minutes passed, and all sounds disappeared. I cautiously approached the opening and looked. Summer was lying on the ground, smoke billowing from every part of her body, as if she were burning and turning to ash. In pain, she raised her hand towards me, as if she were begging me. "The skin! The skin!" I quickly ran from my place, took the skin, and went down to her. I had to save her with all my strength. I broke the door and entered. Her body was fading away. I spread the skin beside her quickly, but strangely, her body continued to burn. What was the reason? I did exactly what I had done before. Minutes later, she turned into a pile of ash. I was confused about what had happened and found no explanation for anything. But I remembered that I saw an agenda in her wardrobe. I quickly opened the wardrobe and took the agenda. I flipped through its pages rapidly, finding names, dates, and stories. I told myself I would read it leisurely at home to understand what I had seen. And that was the last night I would spend in the hotel. I returned home feeling tired and exhausted. I thought the matter was over like that. But I was wrong, because the next day I woke up in the middle of the night, and I feel like my whole body is burning. My hair has started to fall out and turn white. My skin started to wrinkle. My teeth have started to grow. I am experiencing the same thing that was happening to Sama. It seems that whoever holds this cursed skin gets the curse transferred to them. So the curse left Sama and hit me. That's the reason I couldn't save her. I had already touched the skin. I stretched the skin beside me, and within minutes, my body transferred to the empty skin. And I put my old leather jacket inside the box. The curse struck me, and that's it. I had to listen to Sama and leave me alone. But it's done. What's done is done, and now I have to live with this curse. I just said fine, as long as I'm going to live like this. So I have to read about the people mentioned in the agenda, so I can understand the story behind this curse. And the beginning was in 1935 with a famous Egyptian scientist and his team. The topic began with the discovery of an ancient tomb of one of the ancient Egyptian princesses. It is said that she was very disliked by the entire royal court, to the extent that the priests cursed it with the cursed whip's curse, and let her live with this curse for a while, and then we will embalm her while she is still alive. And they placed this box with her in her tomb, believing that the curse would remain with her even in the afterlife. And they don't know that the tomb will be opened and the curse will be transferred to other people. Unfortunately, after opening the tomb, the scientist did not know its name because the ancient Egyptians did not write the names of disliked or cursed figures. But what was special about the princess's mummy was that it was embalmed while she was screaming, and her features were all horror. They called it the Screaming Mummy. The tomb only had the coffin and this box. So the Egyptian scientist took it and became the first cursed person in modern history. And he was the first one to write his story in this agenda. If you read the agenda in the box, you'll find his story and the story of everyone the curse was passed on to. Until my story ends, and don't worry, there are still a few pages left for you to write your story too. After I took the box, the curse was passed on to me. I decided that I won't live like this for long. I was very upset with myself because of my curiosity, and I kept blaming myself a lot for staying in this hotel and taking the box after I saw what was happening to Summer. I just sat and thought a bit about the reason for my presence in Alexandria, and the reason I work as a sales representative. And I realized that all of this happened because of you and your father. You are the main reason for my curse. You are the reason I was deprived of my job at the university. So you are the one who deserves this valuable gift the most. Dear Mark, by the time you read this letter, I will have turned to ashes because, in short, I cannot live with this curse. I promised you that when you read the answer, you would die of fear. I wasn't lying to you. Surely you touched the skin, and surely the curse has struck you even more. In the windswept town of Al-Baqarah, the air buzzed with life and whispered secrets, laden with the rich scents of spices wafting through the winding markets, where vendors called out like sirens, beckoning passers-by toward their exotic wares. The sun dipped low on the horizon, spilling molten gold and crimson over centuries-old buildings that cradled tales of love, loss, and unexplainable phenomena. It was a place where shadows danced behind every corner and folklore mingled with fact. A place where magic was not just a fantasy, but a palpable force that occasionally slipped through the veils of reality. Among its restless inhabitants was Amir Malik, a bright-eyed university student with a ravenous thirst for knowledge and a penchant for delving into the obscure. With tousled black hair framing his angular face and inquisitive brown eyes darting with curiosity, Amir often found himself lost in the pages of dusty tomes that spoke of alchemy, astronomy, and the mystic arts. He would spend hours tucked away in the town's ancient library, a cathedral of knowledge adorned with towering shelves and hidden alcoves, where the musty scent of old parchment hung thick in the air, suffused with an inexplicable energy. But the weight of existence bore down on him. Mundane university life stifled his yearning for something greater, something that glittered just out of reach. He often recalled tales spun by his grandmother, whispers of ancient spirits, unearthly powers, and the seductive call of forbidden knowledge. These stories, which once filled him with wonder, now twisted in Amir's mind, beckoning him toward an insatiable desire to explore what lay beyond the veil. One fateful day, while combing through the grey, dust-coated shelves, Amir unearthed a weathered volume, the imitation of Shams al-Ma'arif. The cracked leather cover was adorned with cryptic symbols that seemed to shift as he gazed upon them. His heart raced as he cradled the book against his chest, a forbidden fruit tugging at the edges of his soul, whispering dark promises of power and understanding. Something primal stirred within him, a deep longing to explore the shadowy underbelly of magic, a siren song that promised liberation from life's disappointments. That evening, cloistered in his room, Amir lit a solitary candle, its frail flame flickering in the gathering darkness, casting elongated shadows that twisted upon the walls like phantoms welcoming him. A chill crept through the room, wrapping around him in a cold embrace as he opened the book for the first time. The pages were filled with twisted calligraphy and archaic symbols, telling the tales of rituals that could sway fate, summon spirits, and bind the essence of life itself. With each incantation that fell from his lips, a thick tension filled the air. The room darkened, shadows stretching and swirling as if alive, eagerly consuming the meager light from the candle. Amir's hands trembled with a mix of fear and exhilaration as he recited a forbidden spell, one that promised to imbue him with unimaginable wisdom. The temperature plummeted, a sharp wind sliced through the room, snuffing out his candle, the sudden plunge into darkness sending a wave of dread down his spine. Unyielding, Amir descended deeper into the text, drawn by an insatiable thirst for knowledge. His thoughts spiraled into a haze, and he stumbled across a passage detailing a harrowing ritual involving the blood of a black cat. a sacrificial offering to summon a jinn that could grant him omniscience and dominion over the darkness he had reluctantly invoked. Conflicted yet entranced, Amir stepped out into the cobbled streets of Al-Baqarah, where evening cloaked the town in an eerie quietude. The sky hung heavy with foreboding clouds. The moon obscured, casting shadows that seemed to whisper secrets of the night. He wandered through the winding alleys, lost in thought, when a sleek black cat flickered into view, perched atop a rickety fence, its luminous green eyes locking onto his with chilling resolve. The air thickened and crackled with unspoken tension, and in that moment, Amir felt as though time itself had stilled, everything hinging on this singular moment of reckoning. Taking a step forward, Amir's heart thundered in his chest. He reached out, enveloped in a haze of desperation and dark desire that drowned out his senses. The cat let out an unearthly screech, its fur bristling in alarm as it slipped through Amir's fingers like smoke. He stumbled, breath ragged, mind racing, as the echo of its cry died harshly in the night, leaving an unsettling void. Days turned into a warped ballet of nightmares. Amir became consumed by the insatiable thirst for power. Shadows unfurled around him, wrapping tendrils of darkness around his very soul. The connection with the Jinn Queen deepened, wrapped around his consciousness like a vengeful spectre, urging him ever deeper into the arcane. The eeriness of his family's household grew palpable. His little sister Amina, once a bright spark of joy, wandered the halls with a haunted gaze, speaking in hushed tones to unseen companions that only she could perceive. One blistering night, Amir had a vision that left him chilled to the bone. He saw Amina standing at the edge of their garden, entranced by the glow of the moonlight. "They're waiting for you, Amir," she whispered in an eerie tone that wasn't quite her own. "They want to play." Her eyes glimmered with an unnatural light, as if the shadows beckoned her closer to the abyss. In that moment, joining the embrace of the supernatural seemed inevitable. One night, unable to bear the tension any longer, Amir made a pact with the Jinn Queen, binding himself to her as he viciously recited the incantations he had memorized. The air throbbed with power as he drenched the circle in blood, his heart racing with exhilaration tinged with horror. The temperature plummeted, his breath formed clouds of frost, and he felt a chill seep into his bones as a presence loomed within the darkness. A tangible force that promised knowledge but threatened to devour his soul in return. From the depths of the shadows emerged the Jinn Queen, a figure adorned in flowing black silk, moving with a grace that belied her sinister purpose. Her eyes glowed with an unsettling intensity, filled with the depth of 1,000 eternal nights. "You summoned me, Amir," she hissed, her voice a sultry whisper that coiled around him. "What is it that you seek?" He hesitated, the weight of his desires crashing over him like a torrential wave. As he stood there, vulnerability exposed, the shadows behind her flickered, revealing sinister shapes that writhed and twisted as if they were alive. His heart raced with trepidation, yet he felt as if he were teetering on the brink of the ultimate truth. Then chaos ensued. Laughter echoed hollowly within the walls, a child's laughter morphing into an unearthly cacophony as Amina stood in silent horror, her body rigid, eyes wide as she caught sight of shadows spiraling around her. "Amir!" she cried, her voice breaking with fear as the shadows began to stretch toward her, tendrils reaching like clawed hands, hungry for the innocent essence of her spirit. "No!" Amir roared, lunging forward, desperate to save her, but the shadows formed a barrier, encapsulating the moment in a suffocating shroud of darkness. The Jinn Queen laughed softly, a melodic sound twisted with malice. "What is sacrificed must shift the balance," she said, her voice echoing in Amir's mind as he fought against the darkness that now encased his sister. In that moment, Amir could feel his sanity waning, terror enveloping him as he battled against the shadows that sought to claim Amina. The room expanded and contracted, bending and warping in a grotesque dance of confusion. He reached out but found himself trapped, visions cascading around him, images of his family's laughter twisted into haunting echoes within a dark abyss. Despair spiraled into anguish as Amina's silvery laugh faded into the clutches of terror. The entity he had summoned coiled tighter, the Jinn Queen's presence becoming unbearable, thick with malevolent intent. "You believe you can defy me," she taunted, drawing energy from Amir's fear, feeding upon it. The temperature plummeted further, and he felt ice seep into his veins, snuffing out hope with each passing second. Visions of their home flooding with darkness began to plague Amir's thoughts. His parents, engulfed by sorrow, his mother's eyes clouded with despair as laughter faded from their once vibrant household. Shadows danced hauntingly outside the windows, flickering in the periphery, feeding upon the moments that defined joy, leaving only an aching void behind. With horror cascading over him, Amir turned to his uncle Farid, desperately seeking help. He sought out his family, their love begging for deliverance from the chasm he had unwittingly created. But each plea only deepened the shadows that surrounded him. Night after night, he watched Amina wander deeper into the darkness, her spirit slipping away like sand through his fingers. A slow, agonizing descent. One fateful evening, despair surged like a tidal wave. He climbed to the rooftop once more, desperate, seeking the light of a full moon hidden behind clouds. With trembling fingers, he clawed through the remnants of the now reduced Shams al-Ma'arif, conjuring memories infused with regret. His sacrifice, his quest for power that had unraveled everything he cherished. The very essence of his being revolted against the darkness, yet the Jinn Queen's influence was a chain that bound him, pulling him deeper into the depths of her malevolence. "No more," he cried, raw emotion bursting forth as he poured out his heart in anguished desperation. He gathered strength, a flicker of resolve igniting within him. "I will release you. Take what you desire in place of my family." He could feel her presence recoil. The air grew thick with charged energy, echoing with uncertainty. Would she accept his offering? But the shadows around him contorted violently, responding with a furious howl, a manifestation of exquisite pain and loss. "You think you can bargain with me?" she shrieked, her laughter spinning into a tempest of malice and rage as she poured forth chaos upon the town, a wrathful storm of darkness that tore through the fabric of reality itself. All while Amir struggled against his own helplessness. The Jinn Queen's wrath unleashed chaos as power surged and streaked through the night sky, illuminating the clouds with ghastly hues of violet and crimson. The town reverberated with an otherworldly moan as the very ground seemed to tremble beneath the weight of a curse unleashed. Shadows leapt from alleyways, manifesting as dark tendrils that snatched at unsuspecting souls, howling as they fed on the fears of the innocents. Wails echoed through the town, mournful cries that spiraled into night, cleansing the very essence of joy from al-Baqarah. Fearing for Amina and his family, Amir raced down the spiral staircase, the wooden steps creaking ominously beneath his weight, an echo of dread as he burst through the door, only to be met with chaos unfolding before him. The whispers had transformed into shouts, ghostly figures weaving a tapestry of despair, clutching at the air and reaching for those who tried to run. Panic rippled through the night, and shadows crowded around, mingling with the cries of terror and confusion. Within the suffocating darkness, Amir found his parents huddled in fear, holding Amina tightly. "Amir!" his father shouted, eyes wide with disbelief. "What have you done?" The accusation hung in the air, mingling with the suffocating anxiety that gripped the house. The shadows writhed around them, reaching for strands of hope woven into their family's fabric, threatening to snuff out every flicker of light. Each time he felt he moved forward, the shadows snarled, dragging him back, their whispers weaving tales of despair and pain. "Amir!" Amina cried, her voice echoing with raw anguish, reaching for him through the veil of darkness that encroached. "Help me." She stretched her small hands, pulling against the tendrils that sought to bind her. With heart racing, Amir lunged forward, striving to cut through the darkness encircling her, desperately reaching for her innocent soul. The Jinn Queen roared with unholy laughter, drawing strength from the chaos around her, pulsing with furious delight as a cacophony of expressions flickered across her ethereal face. Shadows rippled and flickered in discordant rhythms, wrapping tighter around Amir's family, feeding on their fear and despair, each hiss and snarl announcing the approach of madness. "Let me go," Amina screamed. tears mingling with the shadows that clawed upward, threatening to swallow her whole. The jinn's laughter twisted around Amir, urging him toward hopelessness, echoing in his mind a chilling melody that promised power while ripping apart the very fabric of his existence. Drawing upon the last vestiges of hope, Amir gathered his strength, defying the encroaching darkness. "I will not give in," he shouted, voice rising over the chaos. "You have no power here." His heart roared to life with righteous fury, a final surge of defiance. Illuminated by the flickering light of an old lantern that had survived the shadows, he began to chant the sacred words, invoking the light that had been buried under layers of torment. The very fabric of reality trembled as he fought against the tide, calling forth memories of joy and laughter, happiness that lingered like a heartbeat even in the deepening shadows. In his desperation, the words slipped from his tongue like a lifeline, weaving a shield around his family, illuminating the darkness with vibrations that erupted into a symphony of harmony. The shadows recoiled, howling in agony as they fought against the light, tendrils burning and snarling as the veil began to tear asunder. Amir could feel them twist, unraveling before the unwavering resolve of love, burning away at the tendrils that threatened to ensnare his family. "I cast you back," Amir shouted, the raw conviction propelling him forward as he tethered his soul to those he loved, intertwining their fates amidst the chaos. With a formidable rush, the forces collided, light meeting darkness in a cascade of brilliance that exploded like fireworks in a midnight sky. At that moment, the Jinn Queen shrieked, a sound filled with both fury and fear, her form twisting and contorting amidst the eruption of light. "You dare resist?" she roared, and in that moment of desperation, Amir could feel her power shatter against his will, the essence of darkness unraveling before the relentless onslaught of light. Caged in her own darkness, the queen howled as the shadows folded in around her, snapping like tendrils of smoke retreating from the light. The walls shuddered, and the very foundation of his home trembled as her form dissipated into oblivion, drawn back into the void from whence she had come. The oppressive weight of dread clawing at Amir's heart began to lift, replaced by a warm glow that enveloped his family. As the shadows receded, the laughter of his family echoed through the halls, illuminating their hearts once more. The frantic atmosphere twisted into tender relief as Amina raced into his arms, her spirit unbroken, her face bright with joy against the dark aftermath of despair. But the scars of their encounter remained. As the faint afterglow hummed around them, Amir felt the lingering shadows fluttering at the edges of his consciousness, warnings that he could never fully escape the entanglements of darkness. Reality settled back into a precarious calmness, leaving them huddled together inside the walls of their home as dawn broke. Fractals of light spilling in through the windows, scattering the remnants of gloom into the corners of the room. Despite the imminent dawn, a gnawing anxiety flickered in Amir's heart, an awareness that the whispers would never cease, that the shadows would always be waiting, coiled around the fragile threads of existence, patiently biding their time for another moment of weakness, for another seeker who dared to reach into the depths of the unknown. And as al-Baqarah awakened under the first light of day, Amir understood the price of forbidden knowledge, a lingering reminder that in the pursuit of power there lies an intoxicating danger, a darkness that can lay claim to the soul, echoing through eternities. With each passing moment, the fabric of the town would weave new stories, and somewhere within the heart of al-Baqarah, shadows would remain, whispering and curling, eternally awaiting the next brave soul willing to cross the threshold into the abyss. I am a young man ensnared in a nightmarish land where the sun mercilessly beats down upon parched earth, transforming it into a cracked wasteland of despair. The wind howls mournfully through that desolate landscape, carrying with it whispers of the damned, chilling the very marrow of my bones. In a village gripped by fear and ancient superstitions, the inhabitants regard me with a blend of awe and palpable terror. They approach with hesitant, cautious footsteps, as if I were a venomous creature poised to strike. Their eyes dart about, flickering with apprehension, betraying the unspoken dread of the darkness that looms just beyond their comprehension. Rumors swirl like malevolent spirits through the dusty streets, tales of my supposed powers weaving through the air, each tale growing more twisted and sinister with every telling. The desperate souls among them come to my door, their eyes sunken and hollow, believing I can grant their darkest desires or banish the shadowy specters that cling to their lives like a leech suckling on despair. Yet the agonizing truth is far more horrific. I do not possess true powers. I am merely a cunning trickster, weaving a web of illusion and deceit that ensnares them in a trap of my own design. The question gnawing at my very being remains: why do they label me a sorcerer, and why do I willingly embrace this harrowing role? My malignant gift manifests in an unsettling talent, the ability to pry open the fragile doors of the human heart and mind, exposing their deepest fears and squalid desires. Picture, if you can, a desperate woman, her sunken eyes gleaming with the reflection of her torment, begging me for deliverance from her abusive husband. She pleads, her voice trembling as she recounts lurid tales of pain and humiliation. A shiver of dread races down my spine as her words weave a tapestry of woe. "Make him love me," she cries, the desperation clawing at my own heartstrings. "Make him stop his cruelty." In that moment, a cruel ecstasy flickers through my veins, dark and insatiable, as sinister ideas cascade through my mind, each more twisted than the last. Steeling myself with icy resolve, I instruct her to inscribe arcane symbols onto a shard of tattered paper, to chant twisted incantations that roll off my tongue like poison, echoing from the dark corners of my haunted soul. I whisper, "Listen carefully, but do not speak, lest the shadows feast upon you. Avoid even the faintest flicker of conflict, or a darkness far worse than your husband's cruelty shall engulf you." Little does she know that if any woman chooses to listen and succumb to the caresses of her spouse's tyranny, she might witness a monstrous transformation. But her salvation would arise not from any spell, but rather from the intricate manipulation of her own reality. A twisted psychological game binding us all in despair. To the countless souls seeking my help, I wear the mask of a mystic, even as I am ensnared in a dance with shadows far darker and more lethal than the daylight outside. One fateful day, drenched in an oppressive silence that felt too heavy to bear, 3 men besieged my doorstep. They appeared as dark figures carved from the very fabric of despair, their weighty presence suffocating the air around them. Clad in robes that hinted at wealth, yet radiated an ominous urgency, they drew closer, an unholy alliance teetering on the brink of nightmare. The eldest among them, a robust man named Edward, stepped forward, his face pale and ashen as though all warmth had fled his very being. The dread swelled in Edward's eyes like a storm cloud poised to break, and I felt the cold tendrils of despair tighten around me. "My son," Edward rasped, his voice quaking with an otherworldly tremor. "He has fallen victim to a malignant spirit, a tormented creature that fastens itself to the innocent, siphoning away joy and vitality." His words lingered ominously in the air, pregnant with horror, echoing through the twisted recesses of my mind like the final toll of a death knell. Desperation hung around him like cloying smoke, sharp and suffocating. Only I could save his child from this insatiable darkness, he insisted, and in his eyes I saw a flicker of hope mingled grotesquely with raw terror, an anguished reflection that threatened to consume us all. He offered me gold, the kind that glimmers with promise yet carries the weight of doom, a fortune enough to make a heart hastily dance with greed. An intoxicating surge of exhilaration coursed through me, entwined with dread. This was the twisted path I craved, a chance to engage with malevolence itself, to weave myself into the dark tapestry of despair where innumerable spirits languish. My heart thrummed with excitement as I gathered my bag, brimming with dread-inducing tools of my trade, grotesque relics that had absorbed the agonies of countless souls, twisted bones, dried herbs, and tomes filled with heretical knowledge whispered unspeakable truths, each one heavy with the crimes of its past. As we embarked on our foreboding journey toward Edward's home, the sun plummeted beneath the horizon, surrendering the world to an oppressive blanket of darkness. The sky bled dark hues of crimson and orange. a grotesque painting of death that seared the landscape, casting writhing shadows that resembled tormented souls in eternal agony. As we traveled deeper into the wilderness, a realm where reality twisted like a serpent ready to strike, an unnatural silence encased us like a shroud, smothering my senses. The air became dense, stifling, each breath pulling me deeper into the crisis of entrapment. Dread quickened my pulse as my mind betrayed me, conjuring visions of horrors lurking just beyond the reach of my headlights. Suddenly, a dark figure materialized before us, an apparition entwined with tenebrous shadows. A spectre cradling a black cat, its eyes glinting like polished obsidian, glaring into my very soul. Terror surged through me, a frantic pulse racing through my veins, even before Edward let out a strangled scream, a sound reminiscent of a beast caught in its death throes. I slammed my eyes shut, heart pounding with primal instinct, desperate to disbelieve the unfolding nightmare. But in an instant, the figure melted into the darkness, vanishing like a melting candle before the chill of an unfathomable night. Moments later, fate's cruel thump delivered a dire blow. A gaunt figure appeared on the cracked asphalt ahead of us, past the cruel gleam of the headlights, a shadow so emaciated it could slip through the very fabric of reality itself. I felt dread coil tightly in my stomach, a serpent tightening its grip as the figure drew closer, its face obscured, yet bearing an unsettling familiarity that twisted my heart into a knot. Unholy recognition gnawed at my thoughts, a monstrous terror already unfurling. Panic seized Edward. He screamed as if gripped by primal terror, his hands clawing at the steering wheel as he tried to evade the dark harbinger of doom. But our frantic efforts to escape proved futile, and the inevitable crash arrived with a sickening finality. The vehicle careened violently into the embrace of a gnarled tree, the impact reverberating with the force of 1,000 tormented wails. The sound of metal screaming and wood splintering merged into a symphony of anguish that resonated in my ears like a haunting lament for our doomed endeavors. As the acrid scent of gasoline engulfed the cabin, a sickening realization washed over me. We were ensnared within a tale of our own creation, deepening the horrors around us. Panic exploded in the air, hearts pounding like trapped animals as we clawed at the doors, scrambling into the oppressive embrace of the darkened night, desperately seeking an escape from the unseen terrors that lurked just beyond our vision. Yet I found myself frozen in place, horrified in a paralyzing grip that coiled around my throat with unyielding force. Shadows slithered beneath the vehicle, a relentless and insistent force tugging at my senses, the echo of dread clawing at my sanity. With trembling fingers, I reached for the door, bracing for the unfathomable terror I felt just outside the metal barrier. What emerged from the suffocating shroud of darkness was a sight wrenching enough to tear sanity asunder. A filth-encrusted hand, grotesquely decayed, clawing desperately at the door with an urgency steeped in malevolence. The skin had rotted and shriveled, a morbid testament to the ravages of fate. None of it was human anymore, merely a ghastly mockery of what once was. Driven by sheer instinct, I fought against my own paralyzing dread. I slammed the door shut with fervor born of panic, but the insistent force outside was terrifying, almost supernatural in its hunger for release. Instantly, the door burst from its hinges with an ear-splitting crash, collapsing against the ground like a fallen angel bathed in despair. In the opening lay an emaciated figure, a man drenched in blood, his eyes seething with unholy fury, emitting a primal, bone-chilling growl that threatened to scorch the very air around us. He lunged toward me, bared fangs dripping with malice, the scent of death wrapping around him like a shroud, grasping at my throat, unleashing waves of terror that set my heart racing with the primal instinct for survival. Edward and the other men screamed, voices merging into a cacophony of despair as they attempted to subdue the deranged man writhing in their grasp. Frenzy surged within me as I fumbled through the relics in my bag, desperately grasping at the artifacts that had once made me feel powerful. I withdrew a leather whip fashioned from the skin of a wolf, an artifact suffused with dark folklore, its very presence demanding reverence. Legends claimed it possessed the ability to control spirits and dark entities, yet I stood terrified, unsure of the very powers I had once manipulated to my advantage. As I wielded the whip against the man, striking him repeatedly, I felt a twisted sense of glee intermixed with dread. Blood splattered against the walls, a grotesque mural illustrating the horror of our struggle. He howled not in agony, but in victory, feeding on the terror that surrounded him, while his eyes gleamed with a malevolent glee that seemed to devour the very light. An ecstatic dance of life and death, roiling deeply in the macabre. In the throes of panic, I hurried to recite an incantation from the Sun of Knowledge, a tome weighted down by blood-soaked history and sinister truths. My voice trembled as I called upon forgotten forces, my heart hammering in a desperate rhythm. The air thickened, charged with unseen dangers, and as my words spilled into the night, the man's voice twisted into something grotesque, a guttural growl laced with a malicious intelligence. "I will not leave you, son of Adam. I will not leave you, human." With those words, thick, acrid smoke billowed from his mouth, clawing its way toward me, a wicked spectre eager to reclaim lost souls. Shadows advanced, snaking around me, and I gasped for breath, feeling my chest tighten under the weight of their malevolent presence. I felt the temperature plummet, icy tendrils tethering me to the ground, rendering me helpless against the mounting horror. Chaos erupted, and the desperate screams of Edward and the others faded into an infinite abyss as they raced into the night, driven by sheer terror, a reaction deeply rooted in instinct. And I remained, an unwilling witness to the monstrous reality unfurling around me, strings of destiny pulling tighter, wrapping around my throat until I could hardly breathe. My consciousness faltered and flickered, fading into an oppressive void, swallowed by the all-encompassing darkness that enveloped me. When awareness returned, I found myself sprawled in a sterile hospital room, the air thick with the acrid scent of antiseptic and sorrow. Blinding fluorescent lights pulsed overhead like a malevolent heartbeat, casting a harsh glow that carved cruel shadows across the walls. Time twisted around me like a relentless spectre, second after second bleeding into an eternity that weighed heavy against my soul, a clock ceaselessly counting down to my inevitable reckoning. The gnawing dread clawed at me, a shapeless behemoth refusing to be banished. Haunted dreams plagued my slumber, grotesque visions weaving through the fabric of my nightmares, and the darkness that had chased me lingered long after waking, gnawing at the corners of my sanity like a ravenous beast. With every creaking door and rustling shadow, the world began to close in, suffocating me under the weight of an encroaching dread. I gathered the remnants of my shattered courage, deciding to banish the artifacts that had ensnared me in this cursed existence. Collecting every relic that had once aligned me with shadows, wicked treasures, tainted tomes, dark talismans steeped in otherworldly whispers, I locked them away in a decaying chamber, surrendering my heart to dread of what lay within. But the shadows would not relent. Each tortured night dragged me back into their grasp, tightening their fingers around my throat until I could scarcely breathe. Again and again, the anguished cries echoed through the emptiness, and each creak of the house reverberated like the sound of chains binding me to my despair. One bleak night, I jolted awake to a deep, sorrowful wail, a mournful cry of agony that echoed through the walls like the lament of tortured spirits yearning for release. It was accompanied by the incessant screech of that black cat, its cries filtering through the darkness like an ominous omen, sounding far too close for comfort. A shiver crept down my spine, mingling fear and curiosity in a relentless whirlwind. I stumbled toward the source of the sound, heart pounding against my ribcage as dread coiled in my gut like a viper, warning me of the horrors waiting just beyond the door. With slow, trembling hands, I pushed it open, an act of reckless defiance against the shroud of night. In the gloom, a grotesque sight met my eyes. A dish lay upon the floor, grotesquely adorned with a putrid piece of flesh, marred with an intricate skull-shaped tattoo, a ghastly offering to the void. My stomach roiled, and bile rose in my throat as understanding crashed into me like a tidal wave, drowning me in despair. But beside it lay a piece of human skin, inked with words dripping with malice. Azael invites you to next year's feast. Frozen in horror, realization clawed at my mind like jagged glass shards. I had unwittingly opened a dark chasm, summoning forces that now clamored for retribution, marking me as an unwilling pawn in their unholy game. With shadows closing in around me, brushing against my skin like the ghostly fingers of the forgotten, I felt my sanity crack, splintering under the weight of despair. Even as I felt the encroaching oblivion threaten to swallow me whole, an unsettling knowledge crept into my heart. I had become a vessel for evil, a repository of darkness entwined with the sinister threads of fate. As the air thickened with rising dread, whispering secrets of carnage and horror, I knew that my story was far from over. I existed within the age-old cycle of fear, trapped within an eternal nightmare that would twist and turn with each breath, a spectre bound to the shadows. The night would take its due, and I had inadvertently invited the darkness to claim me. No longer merely a participant, but a willing servant to the very evil I had once sought to conjure. The impending doom pressed in upon me, reminding me that I was not a master, but a mere pawn caught in an inescapable web of shadows, surrendering to the insatiable appetite of the darkness I had unwittingly unleashed.